The best place to hide the truth is in the pages of a book.
Maybe we should just read. Maybe we should just read.
Welcome to Hayes Reviews. Good evening. Hello, everybody. This is Nick, creator of Hayes Reviews. We are back with another live stream reading this evening, continuing with the Milner-Fabian conspiracy. This is part 4, and we are making good progress, but as you can see, there is a lot more to come. This is a dense, big book, and we haven't even finished off the second chapter yet. And I don't think we're going to get the second chapter finished tonight because it's massive. It's humongous, but conveniently divided up into sections with handy little headings, which can keep us on track and give us a bit of a structure to follow so that we're not just plowing through page after page after page after page. But what a book this has been so far. Quite a grand, sweeping account of the last 130 years or so. And it's been very dense with names, with organizations, with dates, with key figures and key players who are often left out of our history books and who we have to dive off the beaten track, which is a bit of a mixed metaphor there. You can't really dive off a track, but you go off the beaten track in order to find the books and the resources and to learn about the places and the people who had a big impact, but and are widely acknowledged. It's just that they're not talked about and promoted very much in the mainstream. And so I'm very happy to have you here tonight. If you are tuning in live and if you are watching this on the replay, please remember that there'll be a pinned comment below the video where you can use the timestamps to navigate to the relevant part of the video that you are interested in and that you are looking forward to learning about. I will quickly pull up a list of the headings that we're going to be covering in tonight's reading. I posted them on my Telegram chat. All being well, and everything going smoothly, these are the sections that we've got coming up tonight. So firstly, we're going to be covering Fabianism and government, the lib-lab conspiracy and the Labour Party. Then we've got making Britain socialist. Then we've got a thoroughly Fabianized world, Fabianism's global network. After that will be Fabianism and world revolution. And if there's time, if we are not tired and we are still eager to learn and we have energy and good momentum built up that we do not want to interrupt, then we will finish off with a section called the Open Conspiracy, which long-time listeners of my channel will be aware is the title of a H.G. Wells book, which we have read in its entirety on this YouTube channel, not on Rumble or on Odyssey. It's only on YouTube, but it's in the playlist section. You can watch that. It's about 5 or 6 videos, I think. And I'd like to go back and listen to that. That was the first book that I read on the channel. And I just knew, I was just shocked by the title. I'd never read it before. I didn't know so much about H.G. Wells. I just thought, this is pretty crazy that this guy put out a book called The Open Conspiracy, because my experiences of conspiracy research have been that it's something that gets censored, something that gets deleted, something that gets poo-pooed, pushed aside, dismissed. So a lot of the time, there's a lot of nonsense as well in the conspiracy research community, particularly parts of the internet where those kinds of creators hang out. There can be a lot of nonsense going around, a lot of claims that are unverifiable, a lot of accusations, a lot of theories and actual theorizing that's not backed up by reality, by evidence, by documentary sources that we can point to, right? So that is the thing. That is a problem. So when I learned that there was a book called The Open Conspiracy by none other than H.G. Wells, one of the most famous, popular sci-fi writers ever, I would say, it kind of took me aback, and I thought, I need to know what's in this book. What is the Open Conspiracy? What does it consist of? And sure enough, we read through it on the channel, and the Open Conspiracy is basically a plan to turn the whole world into a massive world socialist state. That's basically the plan. And H.G. Wells talked about doing it openly because why not? It's that's how you get everybody involved. You get everyone to sign on to it, and you get people to accept it by being open and transparent and doing it without the intrigue, without the, I suppose, what's the word that I'm looking for here? The stigma attached to doing things in the shadows. Okay, so when you are being clandestine and you are keeping secrets, that's what makes people ask questions. That's what starts conspiracy theories, because if you don't have access to the truth, then you have to make up a theory about what's going on. You know, the number one cause of conspiracy theories is government secrecy. It's governments hiding things and classifying them as top secret, not to be released for 50 plus years, sometimes longer in some cases, classifying documents, then declassifying them many decades later when the relevant people are dead or senile or beyond reproach because of whatever life factors and things have happened in the meantime. So the fact that this happens is what drives a lot of the conspiracy theorizing, okay? But we try not to do too much theorizing on this channel. We try to instead go to the books. So at least we have some piece of evidence to point to that can say, this book, this writer on this page in this chapter makes this claim. And then we can take it one step further and do more digging if needed. But at the very least, we have a book to point to say, this is where I'm getting my ideas from. And that, to me, is more solid ground to stand on than just consuming endless amounts of documentaries and podcasts and unverifiable information from people from all corners of the internet with all manner of backgrounds and agendas, and who knows how they got to where they got, where their information is coming from, and whether it's any good, right? So for me, let's get into the books. Let's read the books. Let's read a lot of books, cross-reference them, cross-check them with each other, and see what remains, what is non-contradictory, and what seems to map onto the reality that we find ourselves living through, which I think we can all agree it's pretty wild. It's getting pretty wild out there. It's been pretty wild for quite a few years, and I can imagine that it's only going to get wilder. And so the first book we read on the channel was The Open Conspiracy, and today, 9 books later, I should say, we are reading The Milner-Fabian Conspiracy. And are we finding that these narratives and ideas interlock and overlap and connect to each other? You bet we are. You can bet your bottom dollar, or you can bet your final pound. But it doesn't have quite a good ring, does it? Bottom dollar sounds better than bottom pound. Yeah, so we'll stick with bottom dollar. We'll go with the US currency on this one, the World Reserve. So it's going to be interesting to get to that section of the book today that deals with the open conspiracy and links some of the things that we've been learning to H.G. Wells, who I think, rather than seeing him as just a mere sci-fi writer, it's better to look at him more as a propagandist, particularly when he was writing nonfiction books such as The Open Conspiracy, putting forth these ideas, saying how they can be achieved. And he was also a popular science writer as well. I have recently took delivery of a book which is autobiography of Juliet Huxley, who was the wife of Julian Huxley, who was the first Director General of UNESCO and the older brother of Aldous Huxley, who wrote Brave New World. And in that book, there's a lot of pictures, and it's her account of being married to this guy who was very well-bred, very, very well thought of, quite a go-getter, you might say, being the first Director General of UNESCO. And they were close with H.G. Wells. And actually, Julian Huxley and H.G. Wells wrote a book or a series of books together about science. And I forget what it's called now, but it was kind of a sort of, I suppose, an account of science. And what we've been learning is that science is a very key part of the foundation of this movement to bring people along down the road to a technocratic socialist type system. Science is what has been placed above everything else. The scientific method is the pure form of that, and that's what people assume is taking place. But actually, instead of the scientific method, in many cases, what we get instead is a thing called scientism, where we are just trained Pavlovian-like to respond to men in white coats with graphs and numbers and glasses who speak in a very serious way and tell us that they've put some data into a computer model, and that tells us that we have to eat bugs and stop eating meat and stop driving our cars and stop having children and all go out and get some experimental DNA altering stuff. I can't say more on this platform, and by this platform I mean YouTube. We are also broadcasting on Rumble and Odyssey and Entropy, so we're going out even if YouTube shuts us down. But so far so good, touch wood, that's never happened, and we're still alive and kicking and making good waves on this platform for the time being. So Scientism, H.G. Wells, Aldous Huxley, the Huxley family, and it all links, and we're really exploring this network that was operating around the turn of the century, back in the early 1900s, late 1800s, early 1900s. That's the time frame that we're looking at. And this book is very much tying together the reading and learning we've done about the Fabian society, as well as the book reviews that I made on the channel of Lord Milner's Second War and the Hidden History book by Doherty and McGregor. These two things are being brought together, one being the Fabian society, the Fabian socialists, and the other being the Cecil Rhodes, Lord Milner roundtable group of imperialists who wanted to spread the British Empire all over the planet because they felt that the British people were the best of all people and the world would benefit if we were able to spread our ways, our way of life, our thinking all over to all four corners of the globe. These two groups, I'd never read anything before about how they interlocked and overlapped. And this book is filling in those missing pieces, the pieces that are left out by Tragedy and Hope, Carol Quigley's magnum opus sitting over my shoulder here, 1,300 pages or something, and also Fabian Freeway, the Rose Martin book, published in the same year, 1966. The book we are reading now is continuing that work and filling in the gaps and making the connections that those two authors, as good as they were, did not make or include for whatever reason in their own work. So I'm very happy to have you here tonight. And let's have a quick look on YouTube. We have got Frank, LJ, Elizabeth, and Gwen, and Adam. Good evening to you all. We also had Nigel Watson here earlier because he's been really helping me recently understanding capitalism and free market capitalism and socialism and communism, and helping me be more accurate in my use of these terms. Because as I said in, I think either the last video, I think it was the last video, Tuesday night's video, I said, I'm not very good with isms. I'm not a sort of theoretical analysis of the systems kind of guy. I get a bit confused by that sort of stuff. But I do use those words when I'm speaking about what we're learning in these books and about history. I will talk about the capitalists and the communists and communism and capitalism. And so it's really helpful for me to have an economics teacher give me his input and help me refine my ability to talk about these things. So big shout out to Nigel Watson, and he's got some comments in the chat from earlier tonight, which you can go back and check out. And there's also a thread underneath, I think, Milner-Fabian Conspiracy Part 1 on this channel. There's a sort of thread and exchange back and forth there between us. And I'm hoping we can get on a call soon and record a conversation further, discussing these things further for the benefit of our audiences. That would be very good. So, yeah, keep an eye out for that. Good evening to everyone on YouTube. Pretty quiet over on Rumble and Odyssey, but that's all right. It's Friday night. I'm not surprised that people have other things to do than sit and watch me ramble on and read a book. So, with that said, I think it's about time to go to tonight's preamble ramble. I do have something prepared. So let's go over to this. All right. A couple of things stood out to me in Tuesday night's reading that I wanted to follow up on. And one of them was the New Age. We've all heard about the New Age, right? The New Age. We hear about the New World Order. That's a phrase that's thrown around by mainstream, well-known household name politicians, both here in the UK and over the pond, across the pond in the States. But the New Age is also thrown around quite a lot as well, particularly in alternative news sphere, the alternative, what am I looking for? There's the alternative news and the alternative media sphere, I suppose I should say as well. A lot of talking about how the New Age is being brought in and we're transitioning into this new era where the old ways of the past are being forgotten and left behind and abandoned because they don't serve us anymore, and we're going headlong into the new, whatever that may be. And quite often it's sold to us as a good thing, a positive thing. Out with the old and in with the new tends to be a phrase that people think denotes something good, I would say. So I was surprised to learn in Tuesday night's reading that this magazine with the title The New Age was being written and being published back in this time era, this time frame that I said we were studying, late 1800s and early 1900s. And so that's what I thought we would have a look at tonight, because I was surprised that this phrase goes back that far. And I thought we would start our preamble ramble with a little contextual information about the New Age. So what is the New Age? Well, it was a British weekly magazine from 1894 to 1938. That's a pretty good run, isn't it? That's over 44 years. And it was inspired by Fabian socialism. So the number one thing it was inspired by was Fabian socialism. And it was credited as a major influence on literature and the arts during its heyday from 1907 to 1922. It published work by many of the chief political commentators of the day, such as G.B. Shaw, George Bernard Shaw, and H.G. Wells. Remember, we were just talking about him and his open conspiracy, as well as Hilaire Belloc, G.K. Chesterton, Arnold Bennett. Oh, and that reminds me as well, just as a very quick side note, something down here that I will just bear with me a second while I get it. I went out for a nice walk today exploring my local area, the place where I'm living now, and I picked up a little bit of treasure, and we'll just go over to the book cam a second and I'll show you the treasure that I picked up. So you can see right here, I got this for £3. So I had to just jump on it and get it. And I don't know if you can make that out, if that's clear enough, but this is the complete plays of Bernard Shaw. The whole lot in one book, one massive book, I might say. It's pretty epic, and it's about it's about tragedy and hope size, 1,400 pages. But for £3, you know, I thought, I can't not get that for £3, just to have that to refer to. So I thought I would let you all know that I picked up that little piece of treasure today. And you can do the same if you go out and spend a bit of time just trolling around some of these secondhand bookshops. You don't know what you're going to find, and you don't know what is going to become important and useful in the future to refer to when the internet is even further scrubbed and even more sanitized and authorized, as in the stuff on there has been authorized and approved, you know, for consumption. You don't know when it's going to be like, well, you know, if you got a book of George Bernard Shaw's plays, because these plays were the propaganda of the time. These were vehicles for spreading ideas which would support the goals and the aims of the Fabian socialist group. That's what the whole previous reading was about. Largely was about how they infiltrated and permeated, that's their preferred word, they permeated these institutions of cultural importance and significance, including religious institutions, but also art, literature, and George Bernard Shaw's plays being published, being spread far and wide, being touted as genius by academic thinkers. That was one means by which support for this movement was drummed up and manufactured, you might say. And so fits in quite nicely with this recap or this investigation that we're looking at right now into the New Age. So, and I've just seen we've got Melissa in the chat as well. Very good evening or afternoon to you. I suppose it might be an afternoon where you are, but yes, indeed, that was a really good find. And I almost walked past the shop. I went into a shop that has a load of books where I've been before and got lots of good stuff, and I saw a Bernard Shaw novel in there, and I didn't get it because I read a few pages and I thought it was called something like The Antisocial Socialist. It was called something like that, and I thought, oh, I might get this, but it turned out to be a novel, and I thought, okay, maybe not. So then I was walking back home, and I walked past this other shop that had a few books in, nowhere near as many as the one I'd just been in. And I walked past it and I thought, well, I'll just go in and have a look. I've never been in that one before. And I walked straight in, and the first book I saw on the shelf was this red spine, and it said The Complete Plays of Bernard Shaw. And I thought, right, that is meant to be. That is certainly not a coincidence. It is a synchronous thing that I'm here for the purpose of buying this book right now. And so I grabbed it and I got it and I brought it home and I rescued it from, because that book could have been sitting on that shelf alone with no home to go to, with no one interested in reading it. Could have ended up in a bin or a landfill. Who knows what could have happened to it? And I rescued it and I have given it a home, and now it is loved and treasured and among friends, right? That's what I tell myself. I anthropomorphize my books to justify my addiction to buying them. You're seeing the real me right now. Gwen Weston says, it was finding you, Nick. Yeah, that's it. You got it. That's the way I like to look at it. So let's carry on with this. This is the New Age, and it was a British weekly magazine. So weekly magazine as well. That's quite a lot of work, to gather and prepare a magazine on a weekly basis, a weekly publication. So what's the history of this Fabian socialist rag? Well, it began in 1894 as a publication of the Christian socialist movement. 1894, that's 10 years after the first meeting of the Fabian socialists. But interesting that it started as a Christian socialist movement publication. That reminds us of what we read in the last reading on Tuesday night about how the Fabians would not tackle and challenge religion head on, but rather get into the organizations and then change them from within to make them more compatible, more malleable, more supportive of the type of socialism that they were wanting to see. So this could be an example of harnessing an existing Christian religious movement or organization and changing its direction to suit the aims and the goals of the Fabian socialists, right? So this magazine was a Christian socialist publication, but it was struggling. And then Orridge and Holbrook Jackson, who had been running the Leeds Art Club, took over the journal with financial help from George Bernard Shaw. That's quite interesting, isn't it? How it publishes George Bernard Shaw's work, and he is also the person who helped the people buy it. So no conflict of interest there then. According to a Brown University press release, quote, the New Age helped to shape modernism in literature and the arts from 1907 to 1922. Modernism is, we're going to have a look at that in a minute, because I thought, I don't really know what modernism is. Let's check it. So the content. The magazine began as a journal of Christian liberalism and socialism. Orridge and Jackson reoriented it to promote the ideas of Nietzsche, Fabian socialism, and later a form of guild socialism, which is a new phrase to me as well. But the New Age did publish opposing viewpoints and arguments, even on issues upon which Orridge had strong opinions. Topics covered in detail included the role of private property. So that might be of interest to Nigel, because I know he's very big supporter of private property. And that was a debate between H.G. Wells and Shaw against G.K. Chesterton and Hilaire Belloc. And I'd like to know who was on which side. I suppose H.G. Wells and Shaw would be on the side of no private property. And these two were on the side, were pro private property. That's my assumption. But this magazine also discussed the need for a socialist party. And that was saying as distinct from the newly formed Labour Party, and then also women's suffrage right there. So quite a lot of hot topics of the time. Interesting that they wanted a party that was distinct from the Labour Party. I have a feeling that because the Socialist Party never got up and running, never got legs, never got the clout that it was intended to get, that they probably just settled for influencing and steering the Labour Party from within and without, I would have thought. On this last point of women's suffrage, the editorial line moved from initial support to bitter opposition by 1912. As the New Age moved away from Fabian politics, the leaders of the Fabian Society, Beatrice and Sidney Webb, founded the journal The New Statesman to counter its effect in 1913, and this, combined with the growing distance between Orridge and the mainstream left, reduced its influence. So they were using this one, and then when it was no longer serving its purpose, they just set up the New Statesman, Beatrice and Sidney Webb, to continue the work that presumably the New Age was doing, but then wasn't getting the results they wanted, so they sort of changed tact and started with a different publication. The New Age also concerned itself with the definition and development of modernism, which we're going to talk about next, and the journal became one of the first places in England in which Sigmund Freud's ideas were discussed before the First World War. Sigmund Freud, of course, the grandfather or uncle of Edward Bernays, who's one of the masters of public relations, and wrote an incredible book about how there was about how on the first page, I think, in his book, it says that the world is basically run by a group of people whose men you don't know, but they have a masterful grip on human psychology, and they're the ones who are pulling the strings. I think the book, is it called Propaganda? I think it might just be called Propaganda, in fact. But interesting link that this was the first place to publish Sigmund Freud's ideas, which are controversial and are often sort of presented to us as firmly established, and everybody, like 99% of people agree that Sigmund Freud's ideas are true and accurate, kind of like the climate warming, global change. It's presented and talked about as though it's fully established fact, when in actuality, there's plenty of people who contend with his ideas and consider them to be incomplete or dangerous as well in some ways. So good to know this early link. The production, it says here that the New Age has been cited as the English equivalent of the German expressionist periodical Der Sturm. And I had a little hover over this to have a look at Der Sturm. And Der Sturm was a literary magazine in German, an avant-garde art dealing with expressionism, cubism, Dada, and surrealism, among other artistic movements. Now, I think it's a bit of a stretch to be calling those things artistic movements, because it ties into the conversation we were having on Tuesday night, about how ugly modern art is and how ugly modern architecture is, and how this is no accident. And then there's a whole list of notable contributors here. Got your H.G. Wells. Interestingly, you've got your Ezra Pound as well, and quite a lot of names who I'm not familiar with. So that would be a good seam of information to dive into and learn about. Like, who are all these people? What do they all stand for? What do they all talk about? But let's continue with the preamble ramble. The thing that stood out to me from this was how that word modernism. And so I thought, okay, we'll have a little look at modernism and find out what that is. So we're not going to spend too long on this, but it's very important, I think, it's an important ism to help us understand what's going on in the world. And you'll see why in a moment. So modernism, this was an early 20th century movement in literature, visual arts, and music that emphasized experimentation, abstraction, and subjective experience. So it's de-emphasizing the objective reality that we share, the laws of that reality, the natural law, both physical and spiritual, and it's emphasizing the subjective experience of you or I, and saying that this subjective experience is actually important and worth investigating and capturing and focusing on, right? Philosophy, politics, architecture, and social issues were all aspects of this movement. So that is quite a broad, sweeping range of topics where modernism had an influence, isn't it? So it's influencing your political sphere, your philosophical sphere, the architecture, as I mentioned, and social issues as well. So very, very important aspects of life, of culture, and of society. Modernism centered around beliefs in a growing alienation from prevailing morality, optimism, and convention. So this is about, that you don't feel part of that morality, that Christian morality over there, do you? Which tells people to treat each other as you wish to be treated. You feel alienated from that. Then you should come over here and get involved in modernism, get involved in the exploration of abstract ideas and subjective experiences and experimentation. And and also move away from optimism and move away from convention. So this is a very, oops, hang on a sec, didn't mean to do that. This is what I was talking about, how we're moving out with the old and in with the new. Modernism is really pushing that idea that let's reject all this old stuffy fuddy-duddy tradition and culture. Let's explore and experiment, find something new, and it'll be much better than all the things that came before, right? So it dealt with moving away from the prevailing morality, optimism, and convention, and a desire to change how human beings in a society interact and live together. So all these things tie in very nicely to the establishment of scientific technocracy. These things tie in quite nicely to, for example, the world depicted in Aldous Huxley's novel, Brave New World, where morality and optimism and convention are totally redefined and reworked and rebuilt. Continuing. The modernist movement emerged during the late 19th century in response to significant changes in Western culture, including secularization and the growing influence of science. It is characterized by a self-conscious rejection of tradition. So you can see very clearly how modernism would be a very useful tool from the point of view of the Fabian socialists, who were trying to reinvent culture, trying to redesign culture and get in between people and their traditions, people and their way of life, passed down through generation to generation. So if you want to transform society and you want to make things totally different, you got to sever people's connection to their past and their heritage and their tradition. And modernism seems to me like a very great way to do this. And look at the example of the artwork here. I would not want that on my wall. It looks kind of demonic to me, very strange. This being on the right here as well. But it's Picasso and it's wonderful. And if you don't think it's great, then you're a Philistine. Anyway, this is a massive article. I haven't gone much further into it. I just wanted to get that sort of introductory high-level explanation of what modernism is, but you can see lots of examples of the kind of artwork produced by this way of thinking and the kind of buildings produced by this way of thinking, and it is all ugly, really ugly stuff. So, yeah, I apologize to anyone out there who's a big modernism fan, and if you think all this stuff is incredible and amazing, but to me it looks like we're going in the wrong direction. I don't think we're heading towards beauty and an increase in what is aligned with the creator's intention behind this place and this world. I think we're going into weird places. And just as I say that, we're on the section of the article that talks about theater of the absurd. So this is something, I don't know, we could look at it maybe another time, but it's talking about logical construction and argument is thrown out the window, and instead it's irrational and illogical speech. So what a great way to destabilize society, to dumb people down, than by trying to push this sort of nonsense and get people to, oh, you can't rely on logic and argumentation. That's a sign of, that's racist. You can't use logic. Logic's racist. And so you need to be using irrational and illogical speech. And don't we find we have a lot of that today? And there's lots of videos of people on, young people on university campuses, and they can't listen to an argument and respond to it and stay calm. They have to shout and scream and stamp their feet and whine and whinge. And not all young people, of course, but there's a certain type of young people now that's been indoctrinated into this idea that your subjective truth is the highest and most important truth, and the rest of the world has to sort of bend itself to fit your idea of what your subjective truth is. And this feeds into all the pronoun stuff, all the gender identities, and fluidity and flexibility of being able to choose what you are on any given day based on how you feel inside on that day. That's modernism. And I'm sure could be traced back to this way of thinking and the emphasis and the pushing of this. So quite telling that we had the New Age magazine shaping modernism and defining and developing modernism, which is a overemphasis on the subjective experience, a de-emphasis on morality, de-emphasis of tradition, and a way to encourage people to just be self-centered, narcissistic assholes, basically. So quite interesting, and I think relevant to the conversation tonight. So what else have we got on the preamble ramble? Annie Besant. So Annie Besant, and actually just before we go into Annie Besant, LJ's just said the new Jaguar advert. I haven't seen it, but that is a great example of modernism, a great example of dumbing down the culture, of deliberately putting things out there which are provocative, which most people dislike, and charging people up, getting them frustrated, getting them triggered, and just causing friction, I think, is the whole main purpose of all that stuff. So another thing that popped out to me in the reading on Tuesday was, and let me just find it because it's like a really nice bit of alliteration, and I'd never heard of it before, and that's why I thought I've got to look into that. The Law and Liberty League. The Law and Liberty League, right? What we read on page 63 was that the Law and Liberty League was founded by Rothschild, Annie Besant, and also W.T. Stead. And it was part of the apparatus that was built to manage and change society. And I thought that's quite interesting that Rothschild, Besant, and W.T. Stead have all been tied together in the creation of this Law and Liberty League. I want to know more about it. And would you know, there is really not very much anything anywhere about this Law and Liberty League. And the only place I could find it was here on Annie Besant's Wikipedia page, which is why I ended up looking at this for the preamble ramble. And there it is. It says here, Law and Liberty League. And that's all it says. The Law and Liberty League doesn't itself have a Wikipedia page. And so I need to do a little deeper dive and more digging to actually find more about it and how Rothschild was connected to it and how W.T. Stead was connected to it. But I thought, seeing as I was looking into it, it would be good to dwell a little bit on Annie Besant, because I haven't talked about her or been through her Wikipedia page on the stream before. And so I thought I would do that tonight. So Annie Besant, a British socialist, theosophist, a Freemason, women's rights and home rule activist, educationist, and campaigner for Indian nationalism. All of that. Quite a busy life she led. Lived to the ripe old age of 85. And, well, pretty interesting character. So she became the first female president of the Indian National Congress in 1917. Quite an achievement. Over 100 years ago, being elected to that prestigious role. But for 15 years, it tells us, Besant was a public proponent in England of atheism and scientific materialism. So two key components to the brave new world order, technocratic, top-down, scientific, ruled by elite planned society that we are learning about and that we are sort of witnessing the rollout of in our lifetimes. She's pushing two very key aspects of that, one being atheism, the other being scientific materialism, because, of course, with these two things, when you indoctrinate people into an atheistic worldview and a scientific materialistic worldview, then you can take them to the next step of a communist, collectivist way of running society. Okay, people who recognize themselves as being created in the image of God and have a ethic and moral code based on something like the Bible or the Christian ethic and moral code are much less likely to accept this idea that human beings are just sort of units of energy and cattle that need to be managed scientifically. But if you think you are just a bag of chemicals and atoms banging into each other and molecules rattling around in a skin meat suit and that there is no soul, no spirit, and it's all just a cosmic accident in which inert matter broke the second law of thermodynamics to assemble itself into complex life, and it was all random, chaotic, and accidental, then you're going to be more primed and more ready to accept horrible things being done to your fellow humans. Because after all, you're just a bag of meat, right? Bag of meat. And, how we treat the animals that we farm. Well, human beings are just no better, no different, and they could be treated that way if the occasion calls for it. So I thought it was quite critical to bear in mind that Besant was pushing atheism and scientific materialism, but only for 15 years. She did actually change her tune later on. But her goal was to provide employment, better living conditions, and proper education for the poor, which is a noble goal, I will say. But why were they poor in the first place is the question we want to be asking. And in 1877, they were prosecuted for publishing a book it's her and this guy, Charles Bradlaugh. And doesn't he look like a fun guy to hang out with? They were prosecuted for publishing a book about birth control. She was a leading speaker for both the Fabian Society and the Marxist Social Democratic Federation. So a leading speaker. Apparently she was an incredible orator and a very engaging, charismatic presence. In 1890, she met Helena Blavatsky, and over the next few years, her interest in theosophy grew. Theosophy is a kind of smooshing together of all the world's religions to find what is common among them and try and distill down a kind of a system that unites all of them. I don't know in too much detail about theosophy. I do actually think this whole symbolism and seal that they've come up with is pretty cool looking. And I like the line that there is no religion higher than truth. But if you are also at the same time pushing, there's no truth other than what is subjective, we need a little bit more explication of what they mean by the word truth in this sentence here before we can buy into it and start reading their books, for example. But she did convert, and she became quite a heavy hitter in the Theosophical Society. In 1902, she established the first overseas lodge of the International Order of Co-Freemasonry. And over the next few years, she established lodges in many parts of the British Empire. So co-Freemasonry is a subset of Freemasonry. I'm not very well read on this particular organization. And so co-Freemasonry is a new one to me today as well. But she also became involved in politics in India, as we read at the top. She helped launch the Home Rule League to campaign for democracy in India, and this led to her election as president in late 1917. And then in the 1920s, she traveled to the United States with her protege and adopted son, Jiddu Krishnamurti, who she claimed was the new Messiah and incarnation of Buddha. Krishnamurti himself rejected these claims in 1929. In her early life, she had a paternal grandfather who was a brother of Sir Matthew Wood, who was a baronet. So she herself was related by blood to the sort of aristocratic elite, the British. Her paternal grandfather was the brother of this guy who was a politician and Lord Mayor of London. That was it. That was the bit that stood out to me. So she was she was related to the Lord Mayor of London, and then she became a reformer and secularist. So remember, secularism was a key part of modernism. Secularism being the separation of church and state. Okay, we don't want any of that God, morality, Ten Commandments stuff involved in our government. We'll separate those things out and we'll run a secular state based on science and scientism. It says here, so here is where it says she was a prolific writer and powerful orator. And she addressed causes including freedom of thought, secularism, birth control, Fabian socialism, workers' rights. And Margaret Cole called her the finest woman orator and organizer of her day. So she's hitting on a lot of topics that I think are indicative of trying to push this modernist agenda of separating people from their traditions, getting them to question the sources of authority of their time, right? And challenging the established norms when it comes to the way people think and the rights that women have and birth control. And I'm sure there was some good stuff wrapped up in that as well. I'm not saying she was an evil person and everything she did was bad. We're trying to just get familiar with the character, the person. I shouldn't say character, really. I think she was a real person as far as I can tell. She was criticizing Christianity. She says in her own words that she says, I leveled all the strength of my brain and tongue, and I exposed the history of the Christian church with unsparing hand, its persecutions, its religious wars, its cruelties, its oppressions. She also says, before about AD 180, there is no trace of 4 gospels among the Christians. So she had Christians in her sights, and she really went after them. And if you remember back to our Preamble Rambles of the Fabian Freeway book, we found out there that communism was similarly overt rejection of Christianity and Christian values. So this aligns with that and makes sense as to why Fabian socialism was appealing to her. The Fruits of Philosophy, this was her book that she co-authored, which was to do with birth control and was quite controversial for the time. And then this bit was interesting. Besant was then instrumental in founding the Malthusian League, which I hadn't heard of. And she did advocate population control as an antidote to the struggle for survival. She became the secretary of the League, and in time, the League veered towards eugenics. Well, of course it did. Because everyone knows that all the good, like if you want to be philanthropic, if you want to care about humanity, then you need to get into eugenics and population control. Radical causes. Besant was a leading member of the National Secular Society, and the NSS argued for a secular state and an end to the special status of Christianity and allowed her to act as one of its public speakers. So I quite found this one interesting, given the balance of power has very much shifted now, and these days it's pretty much totally fine to say whatever you want about Christianity. The more rude and aggressive and what's critical, the better, really. I've talked to people in my family about how nowadays, whenever you see priests, Christian priests portrayed on television, they're always drunk or evil or cruel or inept or stupid or hypocrites. They're never portrayed in a positive way. I can't think of a recent example anyway. But you can't do the same with other religions in this country, at least, because if you do, there will be hell to pay. There will be angry letters written. There will be investigations. Police might show up at your house, So I do feel like maybe at this time she was arguing to end the special status of Christianity, but in the present time, and I think Ioan Ratiu is going to touch upon it in this book a bit later, that the special status of Christianity is gone, but now other religions are enjoying that special status, which Christianity once had. And I'll give you another example. From my workplace, we had an event put in our calendars, which was about Islamophobia Awareness Month or week or something, or day, I don't know. Islamophobia Awareness Day. And I was like, okay, fine. But what about Christianity-ophobia Awareness Day? Oh, there is no Christianity-ophobia. What is that? I've never heard that word before. What does that even mean? And yeah, you haven't heard that word before because it hasn't been spread around. It hasn't been pushed out there. Islamophobia has been pushed out there. Everyone knows that word. Everyone knows what it refers to. Same with transphobia, right? That's been pushed out. But what about like heterophobia? What about the people who are scared and freaked out by heterosexual couples? What about the Christianity-ophobia, Christianity-phobic people, the people who are freaked out and scared of Christianity? So it sounds absurd and probably like a nitpicky thing to say, but my point is that certain words are put out there and weaponized and used to control what can and cannot be said about certain groups of people. And you can highlight the absurdity of it and the stupidity of it in the way I just did by just reversing it and applying it to a different group and pointing out how if you go around saying, do you know what, if I went to my company and said, I want Christianity phobia awareness event, they'd just laugh me out of the office. So I say, well, why have we got the Islamophobia awareness thing on there? You know, why one and not the other? Can you explain that to me, please? And then watch them wriggle and writhe and squirm when they realize they don't know what they're talking about. And they're just indoctrinated with something they've never thought about or questioned before. So she didn't like Christianity or our Annie Besant. But she did like the Fabian Society. And she was in the Fabian Society for, what's that? 5 years? 5 years. And she was sponsored by our good friend Bernard Shaw. Interesting, right? He's throwing a lot of money around, sponsoring people, bringing people in. He's kind of like assembling the Avengers. He's a bit like, what's that one-eyed guy? Nick Fury in the Marvel superhero universe, going around and getting all the superheroes to come together and work together to form the ultimate team to save the day. So Shaw's off sponsoring, buying magazines and sponsoring people who he recognizes are probably for her skills as an orator, as a speaker, her ability to command an audience. He was probably like, we need her on our side so we can spread the message and continue permeating outwards. The Fabians were defining political goals, rejecting anarchism in 1886, and forming the Fabian Parliamentary League, with both Besant and Shaw on the council. In 1887, some of the London unemployed started to hold protests in Trafalgar Square, and this was Bloody Sunday. And Besant offered to have herself arrested, but the police said no, thank you, which is kind of strange. Besant offered herself for arrest, and the police, and an offer was disregarded by the police. What? It's just strange. You read some strange sentences on Wikipedia, and you wonder, okay. So that's a reference to a book, Sally Peters, Bernard Shaw, The Ascent of Superman. And that's Yale University, 1996, page 94. So there's a reference for that. Strange sort of anecdote there. But that happened, Bloody Sunday. She was involved in that. And in the aftermath of Bloody Sunday is when the Law and Liberty League was formed. And it just says by Besant and others. So it doesn't mention the Rothschilds here. It doesn't mention W.T. Stead. Just a very cryptic and unspecific Besant and others. Other what? Other theosophists? Other, I don't know. Just people. Don't worry about it. Don't ask questions. So it seems to me that this Law and Liberty League is either of no consequence, and so there's no information about it anywhere, or it was of consequence and they've kind of just not bothered to include any details about it. Maybe it is mentioned in the Rothschild book somewhere, who knows. So then she went on to get elected to the London School Board in 1888, and then she got into theosophy, and after reviewing a book by Blavatsky, and she went to meet the author in Paris, and she got converted to theosophy. So that went well. Like, I don't know if she was so impressed by the meeting or Blavatsky just put her under a spell or hypnotized her or something. But at this point, she allowed her Fabian Society membership to lapse, and she separated herself away from the Marxists, presumably because theosophy is not atheistic and Marxism and socialism is inherently. So she left that behind. And then when Blavatsky died in 1891, Besant was left as one of the leading figures in theosophy, and she represented it at the Chicago World Fair. She became the president of the Theosophical Society after meeting fellow theosophist Charles Webster Leadbeater. Now, this bit was very interesting too, and ties into something we learned about on Tuesday's reading from the book. Leadbeater claimed clairvoyance and reputedly helped Besant become clairvoyant herself in the following year. Together, they clairvoyantly investigated the universe, matter, thought forms, and the history of mankind, and co-authored a book called Occult Chemistry. And there's a picture of her with a Rudolf Steiner. In 1906, Leadbeater became the center of controversy when it emerged that he had advised the practice of masturbation to some boys under his care and spiritual instruction. Because of the controversy, he offered to resign from the Theosophical Society, and his resignation was accepted. The next year, Besant became president of the society, and, with her express support, Leadbeater was readmitted to the society, who then went on to face accusations of improper relations with boys, but none of the accusations were ever proven, and Besant never deserted him. So that does link directly to some of the conversations we had on Tuesday. The quote that I read from this first Fabian's book. I'll just put the big camera up so you can see that. There's a quote in here about how the Fabians thought that childhood was perfect. Man perfectible, but childhood perfect. And yes. And then we've got Lemon Key Lime. You are one step ahead in the chat there on YouTube. But yeah, you're absolutely right. So this guy, Leadbeater, and Annie Besant, what do? Oh, they set up a new school for boys in India. It took them 3 years to raise the money, and most of that came from Indian princes. Blavatsky had stated that the main purpose of establishing the society was to prepare humanity for the future reception of a torch-bearer of truth, who would be known as a world teacher. Besant came to believe in the imminent appearance of the emissary, and what would you know it? Shortly after that, a few years later, well, not a few years later, that's actually 20 years later, Besant and Leadbeater discovered a 14-year-old called Jiddu Krishnamurti and declared him the probable vehicle for the expected world teacher. And it says here, and this is the words of Wikipedia, it says, following the discovery, Jiddu Krishnamurti and his younger brother Nityananda were placed under the care of theosophists, and Krishnamurti was extensively groomed for his future mission as the new vehicle for the world teacher. Besant soon became the boys' legal guardian with the consent of their father, who was very poor and could not take care of them, so exploiting this poor father. And this Besant is now starting to sound like a bit of a, what's her name? Maxwell kind of character, isn't she? Especially in this section. And then in 1929, 20 years after his discovery, Krishnamurti became disenchanted with the World Teacher Project, and he dissolved the Order of the Star in the East, which was an organization founded to assist him, and he left the Theosophical Society altogether. Although his love for Besant never waned, as also was the case with Besant's feelings towards him. They remained friends. And then she purchased 6 acres of land near the Theosophical Society estate, which became the headquarters of the Krishnamurti Foundation, India. So how about that? So they've got foundations on the go, they've got grooming on the go, and they've got men who like to predate on young boys. Good stuff. Unsurprising, I have to say. And then a little bit here about her later years and death. She was survived by her daughter Mabel, and after her death, colleagues Jiddu Krishnamurti, Aldous Huxley, Guido Ferrando, and Rosalind Rajagopal built the Happy Valley School in California, which is now renamed the Besant Hill School of Happy Valley in her honor. And that's a little school which takes in a small amount of people, students who live there, and they spend all day outdoors doing fun things in nature. It actually sounds like a camping trip, but school, you know. I couldn't really find anything else that was interesting on that. But that's Annie Besant. Interesting character, and one of the very important early influential figures in the Fabian society. A little bit about her. And here's a little bit about her, the chosen one, Jiddu Krishnamurti. I thought I hadn't heard of him. I'd heard of Krishnamurti before, but I didn't realize he was groomed by Leadbeater and Besant. So I thought we'd just have a quick look at his page. It says he was adopted by members of the Theosophical tradition as a child, and he was groomed to fill this role of world teacher, but in adulthood he rejected this mantle and distanced himself from the related religious movement. So the questions I started asking were, I was thinking, well, they want to bring out this leader who's going to unite people, who people are going to follow, who people will worship and ask questions to and look up to, and they're looking to manufacture that, and they're trying to find somebody that they can groom to play that role, and then they can sort of have the power and the influence off stage as his handlers and his advisors, let's say. So it smelled to me like a kind of cultish scam, cult of personality type thing. And this poor guy was, taken away from his father and groomed with, and who knows what he went through. But he lived the ripe old age of 90, a good long life. Excuse me, I've got an itchy nose. But he asserted some interesting things. It tells us here, truth is a pathless land. And I was thinking, truth is a pathless land. So, what? I don't even know. Is that just one? So is that like it sounds really profound. Whoa, yeah, man. Truth is a pathless land, bro. But actually, like, what does that even mean? I don't know. If you think that's profound and it means something that I'm missing, please let me know. For me, I'd rather have paths. Like a book is a path, isn't it? That someone else has walked down, and I like to go down a path that other people who look for truth have gone down, because it just makes things a little clearer, right? If you're just wandering in a completely pathless land, that to me sounds more like there's no correct way, there's no truth. The pathless land to me sounds like a place that doesn't have truth, but I don't know. That was just my interpretation. But he advised against following any doctrine, discipline, teacher, guru, or authority, including himself. That's pretty good advice, I'd say. Don't follow these guys. Listen to what they have to say. Take what's useful and discard what is not, as Bruce Lee would say. He emphasized choiceless awareness, which is something I never heard of. Psychological inquiry, freedom from religious, spiritual, and cultural conditioning. Okay, so that kind of sounds like, I'm sure there's some benefit to that, but it also sounds like wiping the slate clean and cutting your tether to something traditional, something cultural, something that's been passed down to you. Cut all that off, leave it behind, take a load of LSD, wipe your mind clean, and now we can indoctrinate you and program you for what's next, right? So it kind of sounds a bit like mumbo jumbo to me, but I don't know. His supporters, working through non-profit foundations. Oh, the old non-profit foundation, eh? In India, Britain, and the United States, oversee several independent schools based on his views in education, and continue to distribute his thousands of talks, group and individual discussions, and writings in a variety of media formats and languages. So I'm going to check out some of those talks at some point. I haven't yet had the time, because I was just prepping this right before we went live, but some interesting things, a little bit more of the picture fleshed out for you. I hope that was good. And Jiddu Krishnamurti, he has a YouTube channel actually with, I think, 300,000 or 600,000 subs. So pretty well known guy. Apparently he influenced Alan Watts. That's not Alan Watt of cuttingthroughthematrix.com. That's Alan Watts with an S, the ex-Anglican minister turned psychedelic California guru. But I think he was also an alcoholic. And whilst he's incredibly entertaining to listen to and very well spoken and funny, I don't think he was providing people with much nourishment. There's nothing else on this that I've looked at, actually. I should have checked out his death. Somebody in the chat, Lemon Key Lime, says his brother died young. So, right, that's I wonder what the story about that is. And Celine Lyon says, I like this quote from him. It's no measure of one's health to be well adjusted to a profoundly sick society. That's Krishnamurti. Oh, is that him? I like that quote as well, you know. That's a really good quote. So, yeah, I'm not disregarding him. I'm not saying he's a complete fraud and charlatan. I have to spend a bit of time listening to his stuff at some point. But truth is a pathless land. I don't know about that. And then also the classic non-profit foundations. We all know what they're about, don't we? But yeah, there could be some good non-profit foundations out there, I suppose. Maybe. Anyway, I think that is it for tonight's preamble ramble. Let's just check. We haven't got anything else lined up. No, we do not. So I'll take this opportunity to just remind people, if at any point you want to support the stream, you can do so at allmylinks.com/Hayes Reviews. And you've got everything you need there to find out where I hang out, to connect with me, to talk to me, to see where I stream, to donate, and to support. If you feel so inclined, that would be very much appreciated. But of course, it is not mandatory by any stretch of the imagination. Cool. All right, that's our preamble ramble. We are getting ready to dive into the book after I press a few buttons and move a few things around and have a quick look at who we've got talking to us in the chat this very evening. Looks like over on Rumble, we got a completely empty room. No worries. If you're watching on Rumble and you don't feel like typing a message, good evening to you and thank you for being here. On Odyssey, we've got ESP checking in, saying John Steed, The Avengers. Oh, was that the character I was trying to talk about earlier? And then asking the question that I asked, was Leadbeater his real name? Because I was like, this guy's called Leadbeater and there's controversy around him for telling young boys to masturbate. I had the same thought, ESP. I guess it's his real name. I don't know. I've got no reason to doubt that. But yeah, Leadbeater. It could just be the humor, you know, the humor that seems to be woven into the fabric of the universe that creates these hilarious synchronicities from time to time. Or it could be that he picked that name because he wanted people to know what he was all about. You know, well, you know, that's when they're complaining and writing their letters and arresting me. He's like, dude, that's I told you in my name that this is what I do, you know, what I tell people to do. So, yeah, kind of funny, but I did give me a chuckle as well. So I'm just going to rewind a little bit on the YouTube chat and catch up, see what I missed. Celine Lyon, good evening, says by Edward Bernays, a quote from Edward Bernays, who was the nephew of Sigmund Freud. And The New Age was the first publication to publish Sigmund Freud's ideas, as we just learned. Edward Bernays has a quote which says, "We are governed, our minds are molded, our tastes formed, our ideas suggested largely by men we have never heard of." So that quote blew my mind when I first read it in that book, which I think is called Propaganda. Another quote of his was, "The conscious and intelligent manipulation of the organized habits and opinions of the masses is an important element in democratic society." Celine Lyon, thank you very much for those two quotes. They are very important. And I wish I had a little widget that would allow me to show those quotes on screen. But I don't have that widget in my setup here. So I read them out, though. That's good enough, isn't it? Celine Lyon says, exactly, it's all subjective and emotional as opposed to objective and logical. Yep. LJ says they hate the notion of God. I think, yeah, that's very overt and clear. They want to get rid of God. And, you know, they could have had a good reason for that. They might have witnessed a lot of corruption in the church, a lot of hypocrisy on part of the priest class. So that is enough to make people turn away from religion, right? I've seen it. I've talked to people who say, "Oh, all those, you know, those what was the word? Child lovers. How can you take that seriously when look at the state of all these people and the controversies they're embroiled in, right?" So I can sympathize with that rejection. But you are throwing out the baby with the bathwater when you say, all right, just because a priest or a church is corrupt, therefore there's no God and everything is materialistic and science and science is the highest authority in the world, right? So thank you for those quotes and that interaction. Lemon Key Lime says he has a good talk about the computer and the future of man. That's Christianity, and that is the one that I will look up for. And then we've also got Melissa as well, saying this just came in from a listener. The email was in regard to our discussion on Brave New World. Okay, so Melissa of Alan Watt's website, cuttingthroughthematrix.com. I think everyone watching this will know that we had a conversation recently about Brave New World. That's on her channel and my channel. Melissa's saying that a listener wrote to say, I think it exposes some more of Huxley's view of the boundary where the human and non-human meet. Ooh. Yeah, he definitely was reaching for that non-human experience, the beyond, the out there, the dimensions that are hidden from us, that are switched off, that apparently can be unlocked or accessed by way of certain chemical compounds and ingested into our nervous system. You know, the whole doors of perception, mescaline experience definitely makes sense. And I quite like that idea of it being the boundary between the human and the non-human. Melissa says, scroll to bit on Krishnamurti. I'm not sure. Are you talking about the page that I had up before? I'm a bit confused about what that is referring to. I'm not going to lie. And we do have to crack on with the book because we're an hour and 20 minutes in and we haven't even cracked open the book today. But it is Friday, so we get to do that, don't we? So, Bitcoin mining in the YouTube chat. Good evening. Welcome. So as I said, we do have a little bit of... we've got a few sections to get through, and I'll see how far we get. There's like 50 pages left for this chapter. So the first bit we're going to be getting into right now is Fabianism and government, the lib-lab conspiracy, and the Labour Party. So incredibly pertinent and relevant to the UK today, as we are living under a Labour government, and 2 million people have just signed a petition to say that we want another election because we're not happy with this Labour government. So maybe we're going to learn a little bit about why the Labour government is doing what it's doing. Maybe the purposes, the goals, the agendas that they tell us they stand for are actually not that, and they are, what's the phrase? I want to say something like playing to a different tune or dancing to a different tune or someone else's tune. I don't know. I got my metaphors mixed up. So we'll just get on with reading the book. All right. So we're page 73. Hopefully that's coming through clear and you can see that. So, as we saw earlier, the Fabian Society had been close to the liberal camp from inception. Indeed, as conceded by Margaret Cole, with the exception of socialist Tory Hubert Bland, all Fabians were born liberals. Some liberals, such as David George Ritchie and Stuart Headlam, were members of the Fabian Society. Conversely, some Fabians stood in parliamentary elections as liberals, Liberal Labour. While the Fabians masquerading as liberals had the advantage of enabling them to influence politics through the Liberal Party, this tactic meant that they were unable to push through agendas that digressed too far from standard liberal policy. But that didn't matter to them so much, did it? Because they don't want to digress too far because their strategy is slow change. So they just want that next step. What's that next step? We know where we want to go and we know where we are. But what's that next step to get people to take a step towards where we want them to go? And preferably we get them to think it's their idea and that it's something that they've come up with that they want to happen, right? That would be even better. So I think this falls perfectly in line with what we know of the Fabian strategy and the wolf in sheep's clothing mentality that they have. Continuing. Even left-wing liberals could hardly have been persuaded to pass measures that were too obviously or too radically socialist. Therefore, to achieve their aim of making Britain socialist, the Fabians had to set up a political party exclusively dedicated to socialism. The creation of a socialist party had long been advocated by Tory Fabian founder Hubert Bland. But, as a private association, the Fabian Society, like the Milner Group, was reluctant to expose itself to public scrutiny and did not wish to become a political party itself. Its leaders, particularly the Webbs, preferred to stay in the background, pulling wires of different thickness connected with different persons and different groups. That's a quote from Margaret Cole. The only solution was to form a separate organization. This organization, however, could not be overtly Fabian. The Fabians were almost exclusively middle class. Together with their tactic of permeating other bodies, this did not make them exactly popular with upright working class people who were the true labour movement. Therefore, in 1893, the Fabians created the National Independent Labour Party, which aimed to secure the collective ownership of the means of production, distribution and exchange, and was little more than a federation of local Fabian societies led by Fabians Keir Hardie and Ramsay MacDonald. The former had earlier co-founded the Scottish Labour Party with R. Cunningham Graham, who went on to serve as president of the Scottish National Party. Apart from shielding the Fabian Society from public scrutiny, the ILP fulfilled the function of infiltrating the trade union movement and herding it in a Fabian socialist direction. And that's from, in the bracket, the reference for that is Pew. And I realized that I have that book, which is this one here, by Patricia Pew, 100 Years of Fabian Socialism. And they have the slogan, educate, agitate, organize. So every time it mentions Pew in the reference brackets there, that's the book. I think I got that for like £4 on Amazon or something. It was very cheap. All right, continuing. The main target was the influential Trades Union Congress, which the Fabian leadership intended to use for funding socialist and, above all, Fabian members of Parliament. According to Bernard Shaw's calculations, if every union member gave a penny a week, £300,000 could be raised to support 50 MPs. That's also a reference to the book I just showed you from Pew. Trade union funding for the Labour Party is an arrangement which has remained unchanged to date. The TUC, in particular, which counts many a Fabian among its members, is a major donor to Labour. As the brain workers of the party, however, the Fabians, then as now, remained in control of party policy. Having won the TUC over to their side, the Fabians next suggested the formation of a Labour Representation Committee, which was established in 1900. Organised by Shaw and ERPs, the committee consisted of representatives from the TUC, SDF, ILP and the Fabian Society. Had Ramsay MacDonald as General Secretary and became the basis of the present Labour Party. It should be noted that in 1900, MacDonald resigned from the Fabian Society over its support for the Boer War, which he opposed. However, the Society actually preferred to work with collaborators not officially associated with it. Moreover, as often the case with former Society members, MacDonald remained faithful to Fabian principles and as leader of the Labour Party obediently collaborated with the Fabian leadership. Although initially lacking a public overt programme, the electorate was left in no doubt as to the new party's political intentions. Moreover, on the insistence of the Marxist SDF, at its 1905 annual conference, the LRC showed its true colours by declaring as its ultimate object the overthrow of the present competitive system of capitalism and the institution of a system of public ownership, euphemism for state control, of all the means of production, distribution and exchange. In spite of being a separate party, the LRC, which later became the Labour Party, found it expedient not to sever its connections with the Liberal Party, and the latter remained a useful tool for furthering the LRC's career. Indeed, Labour's advances would have been quite unthinkable without Liberal collaboration. In the infamous anti-conservative Gladstone-MacDonald Pact of 1903, the Liberals' Herbert Gladstone reached a secret agreement with MacDonald to allow LRC candidates to stand instead of Liberals in some constituencies in the general election so as not to split the anti-conservative vote. Interestingly, the pact was made not long after the Fabians had set up their Coefficients Club for the purpose of liaising with Liberals and other political leaders. And I think Coefficients Club is where Milner was also a member of the Coefficients Club. I think I'm right in saying that was mentioned in the earlier chapter. The result of the pact was that in the 1906 general elections, 29 Labour MPs, and whom 4 were Fabian Society members, were returned to the House of Commons, providing the Labour Party for the first time with a parliamentary foundation. 3 Fabians were successful as Liberals. So they had Fabian Society members in both the Liberal Party and the Labour Party. This is a classic example of their strategy. Right, it's like get people in both sides, and so it doesn't matter which side gets in because we're going to have some influence. And then once you've got your foot in the door, it's a case of leveraging and widening and getting more of yourself in the door, right? But just get one in there to begin with. So clever. Soon after the elections, the LRC was renamed the Labour Party. Like the Fabian Society, the Labour Party was of course a socialist party. The fact that it called itself Labour and not socialist was part of the Fabians' general strategy of taking over power as discreetly as possible. It helped channel organised labour in a Fabian socialist direction while concealing from the electorate the new party's true agenda. To this day, many Labour supporters are unaware that the party they are voting for is a socialist party, aiming to establish socialism with all its implications, such as total state control and abolition of democracy. As always, the Fabian Society leaders were the masterminds operating behind the scenes. The tactics, strategy, and political attack of the new Labour Party were dictated by the Fabian Society. And that is the reference for that statement is, again, the Pew book, who produced a tract instructing the party to attack capitalism, declaring that the Labour Party is a party against the landlord and the capitalist, and that, quote, every Labour member sent to Parliament is one more nail driven into the coffin of the capitalist system. The very notion of abolishing capitalism, of course, was nonsense. Humans had always engaged in the exchange of goods or trade. Suppressing such activities amounted to dehumanizing life. Abolishing exploitation and monopolistic manifestations of capitalism was one thing. Abolishing capitalism was another. If deviant capitalist practices warranted the abolition of capitalism, then aberrant aspects of socialism too warranted the abolition of socialism. But socialism does not apply its own logic when it is inconvenient to itself, which once again exposes its fraudulent character. I think Nigel Watson would have liked that little bit we just read. I think he would have agreed with that very much. Moreover, the socialists never proposed the abolition or the abolition of the industries that, in their view, defined capitalism, but their monopolization by the socialist state, which was to be run by the Socialist Labour Party and the Fabian leadership behind it. In other words, the true Fabian aim was to replace monopolistic capitalism with monopolistic socialism for the profit of the Fabian leadership and its liberal capitalist collaborators and sponsors. Bernard Shaw and Sidney Webb in particular were the string pullers, ever on the lookout for ways of acquiring political power for themselves. There can be no doubt that the successful establishment of socialism in Britain, which was the express aim of the Fabian Society, would inevitably have resulted in the assumption of power by a socialist regime controlled by the Fabian leadership itself. Significantly, the Fabian Society consciously compared itself to the Milner Group's British South Africa company, BSAC. BSAC, it just gave me a chuckle because what immediately came to mind was ballsack, but that's just my immature man humour. BSAC. Thus, in 1897, the Fabian executive had announced that, like the chartered company in Africa, the Fabian Society will capture and control the British natives for its profit and their own good. The chartered company was Milner Group founder Cecil Rhodes's British South Africa Company, which had received its royal charter in 1889. Okay. So this is some of the actual... This is where the Fabians meet their Milner Group, right? To grasp the extent of Fabian domination in Britain's labour and socialist movement, we only need to follow the development of the new Labour Party. Initially, the Fabian Society had been barely tolerated on the Labour Representation Committee, forcing it to place only one member on the LRC executive and being in constant danger of expulsion. However, ex-member MacDonald was General Secretary and, following the 1906 election, Keir Hardie was elected chairman of the party in Parliament. MacDonald and his personal aide Arthur Henderson were whips. Fabian Society General Secretary Pease himself, who had been on the LRC executive, kept his seat on the Labour Party executive. As pointed out by M. Cole, his influence was not inconsiderable. A week after the election results, the Fabian Society assembled a committee consisting of Shaw, Pease, and other leading Fabians to produce a document, which was tract number 127, laying down a socialist policy for the Parliamentary Labour Party. From that point, both the Labour Party and Fabian influence experienced a rapid growth. In the 1910 general election, with MacDonald still as General Secretary and Keir Hardie as PLP Chairman, Labour managed to get 40 MPs elected. In 1913, Beatrice Webb wrote that the Fabian Society and the Independent Labour Party were well on their way to controlling the policy of the Labour and Socialist movement. In fact, the Fabian Society and the Labour Party were well on their way to controlling the policy of much of the country. In 1914, just before the outbreak of World War I, the Fabian Charles W. Bowerman of the TUC and Labour Party General Secretary Arthur Henderson established the War Emergency Workers National Committee with Henderson as chairman and Fabian J.S. Middleton as secretary. The purpose of the committee was to get the influential trade unions and through them the whole labour and socialist movement to follow the Fabian line in regard of war policies. In 1915, under Liberal Prime Minister Herbert Henry Asquith, the Fabian Henderson became the first Labour Party member to join the cabinet, serving as president of the Board of Education. In 1916, under Liberal PM Lloyd George, Henderson became minister without portfolio and was joined by fellow Fabian George Nicol Barnes as Minister of Pensions and John Hodge as Minister of Labour. By 1922, Labour had won 142 seats in the House of Commons, becoming the second largest political party. As admitted by Pease, the Labour Party was virtually, if not formally, Fabian in its political policy. Indeed, with Fabian Henderson as General Secretary, Fabian mastermind Sidney Webb on the executive and its constitution, manifesto and party policy all written by the two, the Labour Party was a Fabian party. In January 1924, following the 1923 general elections and under Fabian General Secretary Henderson, the Labour Party was able to form the first Labour government in Britain's history with the help of Liberal leader Herbert Asquith. As Prime Minister, MacDonald appointed leading Fabians and Fabian collaborators to his government. The cabinet itself consisted of the following Fabians: Sidney Webb, President of the Board of Trade; Sidney Olivier, India Secretary; Arthur Henderson, Home Secretary; Charles Trevelyan, President of the Board of Education; Philip Snowden, Chancellor of the Exchequer; Lord Parmore, Lord President of the Council; Lord Noel Buxton, Agriculture Minister; Lord Thompson, Secretary for Air; Ramsay MacDonald, Foreign Secretary; Arthur Ponsonby, Under Secretary for Foreign Affairs; the Webb's personal friend, Lord Haldane, Lord Chancellor, who joined the Society in the following year; and Fabian collaborator J.R. Klein's Lord Privy Seal. The government also included the Fabians Clement Attlee, Percy Alden, Arthur Greenwood, William Graham, and James Stewart in minor posts, and other Fabians as parliamentary private secretaries. The 1924 Labour government depended for its majority on the Liberals and did not last long. But Labour was back in power 5 years later, in 1929, again with Liberal support. Henderson was still General Secretary. MacDonald became Prime Minister once again and, as before, appointed the usual Fabian fraternity to his government. His cabinet included the following Fabians: Lord Passfield, aka Sidney Webb, Arthur Henderson, Sir Charles Trevelyan, Philip Snowdon, Lord Parmore, Lord Noel Buxton, Lord Thompson, Ramsay MacDonald, Arthur Greenwood, William Graham, George Lansbury, Margaret Bondfield, who was the Labour Minister, and further posts were taken by the Fabianized J.R. Kleins and others. Basically the same group then, isn't it? It may be noted that the Liberals who helped Labour in its career were close to both the Milner Group and the Fabian Society. Herbert Gladstone was the son of former Liberal Prime Minister William Ewart Gladstone, who had been a member of the so-called Cecil Bloc, which spawned the Milner Group. Herbert, later Lord Asquith, was close to the Milner Group, as well as a close friend of Bernard Shaw and a familiar guest at the Webb's dinner table. And for that last statement, there's 3 books listed in as reference. So you got the Quigley 1981 book, which I think is Anglo-American Establishment, page 30, and then you've got a Beatrice Webb, page 109. I think the Beatrice Webb book might be this one, which is Our Partnership by Beatrice Webb. There she is, her and Sydney. And it's I think that's the one they're referring to, page 109. So these books do exist, and Ioan Ratiu has definitely done his reading and research to bring us this piece of work. And that last reference for the relationship between Herbert Asquith being a close friend of Bernard Shaw and the Webbs is the Pew book that we mentioned earlier. So, pretty well documented. Interestingly, Prime Minister Winston Churchill, who in 1940 invited Labour to join his government, appointing former Fabian Society chairman Clement Attlee his deputy, was not only a former Liberal, but had close links to the Milner Group and its Anglo-American associates, as well as to Fabian leaders. Churchill's war cabinet included leading Fabians like Attlee, Hugh Dalton, Arthur Greenwood, and Herbert Morrison, opened the doors to systematic Fabian infiltration of government, and enabled the Labour Party to take over in 1945. Under Fabian General Secretary Morgan Phillips, Labour, out of whose 393 elected MPs, 229 were Fabian Society members, formed a majority government which included the Fabians. Prime Minister Clement Attlee, Lord Jowett, Herbert Morrison, Arthur Greenwood, Hugh Dalton, Beatrice Webb's nephew, Sir Stafford Cripps, Tom Williams, John Strachey, Lord Pakenham, Arthur Creech Jones, Lord Addison, Lord Pethick Lawrence, followed by Lord Listowel, Ellen Wilkinson, and Emmanuel Shinwell. Similarly, following the 1997 elections, the Labour Party, under Fabian General Secretary Tom Sawyer, appointed the following cabinet: Tony Blair, John Prescott, Gordon Brown, Anne Taylor, Lord Richard, Jack Straw, David Blunkett, Margaret Beckett, Peter Mandelson, Robin Cook, Claire Short, Harriet Harman, etc. I love the way this guy uses etc. in his writing. With one or two exceptions, all of these, beginning with Tony Blair, were members of the Fabian Society. Other Fabians and associates appointed to cabinets under Tony Blair and Gordon Brown included Douglas Alexander, Ed Balls, Hilary Benn, Des Brown, Charles Clark, Alistair Darling, John Denham, Peter Hain, Patricia Hewitt, John Hutton, Ruth Kelly, Alan Milburn, Ed Miliband, David Miliband, and John Reed. In short, by 1997, there were over 200 Fabian MPs out of 418 Labour MPs in the House of Commons. And that's from a Guardian article, The Fabian Society, A Brief History, dated the 13th of August 2001. So, there you are. The massive infiltration of Parliament and the systematic appointment of Fabians to key positions in the Labour Party, and particularly in Labour governments, demonstrates without a shadow of doubt that from inception, the Fabian Society has seen the Labour Party as an instrument for undemocratically exerting political power and influence for its own agenda, while its leadership operates quietly behind the scenes. Yes. That whole section we just read is, the Fabian Freeway book changed my understanding, forever changed my understanding of the British Labour Party. But that section there, naming all those names, which presumably could be fairly easily checked to see if these names were elected to those roles at the times in the elections that he claimed, and if they were members of the Fabian Society. These are things that are within our grasp and our reach to verify, luckily in this day and age. I'm just going to have a sip and then we'll crack on with Making Britain Socialist. Excuse me a moment. Looks like we've got ESP over on Odyssey saying, was Ian Fleming a Fabian? I'm just laughing because I have no idea, but I would really like to know. He was certainly involved in with like the spying in Washington with Roald Dahl, I think, and producing propaganda over there during World War II. I have no idea if it was a Fabian though. CS Mally 369 says, good evening over on Rumble. Good evening to you too. And we got CESP as well saying this is a good book. Sweet. I do think so. I do think it's a good book. The writing is kind of hard sometimes, really long sentences, but it's packed with information and data, and that's what you want, isn't it? Can be a bit dry reading this type of stuff. That section there really reminded me of Quigley's Anglo-American Establishment, which is just like that all the way through. There's not a lot of narrative. It's a lot of names and the meetings that they had and the posts and that they occupied and the titles that they got. And it's pretty dry and boring to read through. But it's history. So history often can be like that. And it can be probably for the authors of these kind of books, it's probably quite tricky for them to write in a way that is engaging, but also gets all the facts and the data and the information in there. And if it was too narrative driven, if it was too sensational, and if it read like a thriller, like a white knuckle adventure, that would be suspicious. But equally, if it's so boring and dry that it's just names, dates, places, and a factual account of what happened, it's also kind of boring to read. So, hats off to people who endeavor to bring us these wonderful artifacts called the books, because what an undertaking, what a labor of love, every single one of them. Even if they're full of propaganda and misdirection and misinformation, I'm still grateful that they exist and we get to pick through them and have that experience. But anyway, continuing with this one. We're never going to get to open conspiracy today, are we? Let's see how far ahead it is. We'll just skip ahead a little bit and find out. Did I go past? Oh, okay. You're all right. We'll continue. We'll see how far we get. So the next section is Making Britain Socialist. As stated in the 1887 Fabian Basis, the ultimate object of the Fabian Society was to advance socialism in England, by which they meant Britain. Indeed, The establishment of Fabian societies in Scotland, Wales, and Ireland, as well as of the Scottish Labour Party, proves that the Fabians never intended to restrict their missionary activities to England. Apart from establishing local Fabian societies all over the country and publishing socialist propaganda materials, including Bernard Shaw's own plays, which I just got a copy of today, the Fabians also set up a number of nationwide organisations for the purpose of consolidating the grip of socialism on British society. Among these were the Universities Socialist Federation, founded in 1912 by Fabian Society executive member Clifford Allen, the Society for Socialist Inquiry and Propaganda, and the Left Book Club. The Fabians were particularly active in promoting socialism during World War II, taking full advantage of inter-party cooperation and state control. Already in 1939, the Society declared that as wartime control embodies a large element of socialism in the sense of public control over industry, commerce, and finance, it was the Fabians' business as socialists to see to it that socialism shall be real socialism and not a, quote, bastard form of state capitalism. Accordingly, in June 1941, the Society formed a Socialist Advisory Committee which included representatives of the influential Left Book Club, urging the initiation of a great leap forward into socialism after the model of the Soviet Union. In July, the Fabian executive resolved to set up a committee on international work with special reference to Anglo-Soviet cooperation. In August, Left Book Club co-founder Victor Gollancz delivered a Fabian summer school lecture on the theme that as Britain was an ally of the great socialist state, it was their opportunity and immediate duty to work for socialism in Britain. The Fabian executive formed a socialist propaganda committee to carry the message through the land. As a result of this massive propaganda campaign, which included the systematic indoctrination of servicemen by socialist tutors in the Army Educational Corps, the Fabians at the 1945 elections were able to launch Britain's first majority socialist government. In an election broadcast earlier that year, Attlee had promised that a Labour government will take the first steps along the road to a socialist Britain. Once elected, his government proceeded to implement the socialist measures proposed by the Fabian Society, such as the nationalisation of land, railways and mines, state, i.e. Fabian Society, control of education, industry, trade and finance, etc., all of which was marketed as necessary to the establishment of socialism for the nation's, quote, welfare. As openly stated by Shaw in his The Transition to Social Democracy, the Fabian object was the expropriation of private proprietors and the transfer of their property to the entire nation. The nation, however, meant the state as the representative of the people. All facts considered, bringing the whole of society under state control and the state itself under Labour control logically meant one thing: total control by the Fabian Society, operating, as always, from behind the scenes with the Labour Party as a democratic front. While the Labour Party has been the principal instrument through which the Fabians have aimed to control British society and to push it in a socialist direction, it has been supported in its task by a spiderweb of academic, research and other organisations exerting influence on both government and public. Apart from LSE, whose declared goal is to promote socialism, these have included the following: Royal Economic Society, founded in 1890 by Fabian leader Bernard Shaw. Imperial College London, founded in 1907 by Sidney Webb. Noel Buxton Trust, a foundation working for social change, established in 1919 by the Fabian Noel, later Lord Noel Buxton. National Union of Students, co-founded in 1922 by the LSE and London University, another Fabian-controlled institution with which the LSE had merged earlier. National Institute of Economic and Social Research, set up in 1938 by LSE graduate and banker Josiah Stamp. The NIESR has had Fabian Society General Secretary Bosworth Monk among its presidents. London Business School, University of London, founded in 1965 by representatives of the Fabian-controlled LSE and Imperial College. Economic and Social Research Council, a clone of the US Social Science Research Council, itself founded in 1923 in collaboration with Sidney Webb's American Economic Association. ESRC was set up in 1965 under the government of former Fabian Society chairman Harold Wilson, with leading Fabian Michael, later Lord Young, as chief executive, who alone was responsible for the creation of over 60 like-minded organizations. John Smith Memorial Fund, founded in 1966 to promote the ideas of former Fabian and Labour leader John Smith. Its advisory board includes Fabians like Lord Dubbs, former Fabian Society chairman. Runnymede Trust, set up in 1968 by Fabian Society honorary treasurer and later chairman Anthony Lester. Institute for Public Policy Research, founded in 1988 with former LSE lecturer and Fabian Society chairman Tessa Blackstone as chairman of the Board of Trustees. IPPR is advised by bodies like the Progressive Migration Advisory Group, whose members include former Fabian Society General Secretary Sundar Katwala. Progress, a Blairite, that is, New Labour think tank and pressure group, co-founded in 1996 by Liam Byrne, a former Fulbright scholar at Harvard Business School, as well as a banker with N.M. Rothschild & Sons and a member of the Fabian Society, who is a leading advocate of corporate-sponsored socialism, which he euphemistically calls inclusive capitalism. And there's a bit in parentheses here, says Progress directors, chairman and presidents have included leading Fabians like Fabian Society General Secretary and later chairman Stephen Twigg, Jessica Esato, chairman of the Fabian Research and Publications Committee, and various other Fabian Society members, supporters, partners and collaborators such as Richard Angle, Dan Jarvis, Alison McGovern, and John Woodcock. While Progress sponsors, partners and collaborators include Fabian organisations like the Fabian Society, British Future, and IPPR. Being affiliated with the Labour Party, Progress is a major source of Fabian influence on Labour after the Fabian Society. Well, it did say, didn't it, that Labour is affiliated with 20 socialist groups? I think it said at least 20 on the Wikipedia page. It said, it was on the Fabian Society Wikipedia page, it says, the Fabian Society is one of 20 socialist groups associated with the Labour Party of Britain. Like, why do you need that many? Smith Institute, named after John Smith. The institute was founded in 1997 by the Fabian Gordon Brown, a protege of John Smith. And there's video of Gordon Brown using the phrase New World Order, if I recall correctly. Then we've got Policy Network, founded in 1999 by Prime Minister and Fabian Society member Tony Blair, in collaboration with Germany's Social Democrat Chancellor Gerhard Schroeder and America's Democratic President Bill Clinton, and chaired by leading Fabian Lord Mandelson. Policy Exchange, established in 2002, has the likes of John Willman, former General Secretary of the Fabian Society, among its senior research fellows. British Future, founded in 2007, directed by the Fabian Sundar Katwala. Migration Advisory Committee, founded in 2007 by Fabian Home Secretary John Reid, and UK Border Agency, formed in 2008 as the Labour government's border control agency by Fabian Immigration Minister and Progress co-founder Liam Byrne, a former Rothschild banker who is also co-founder of the Young Fabians magazine, Anticipations. Wow. What a list. I mean, if you needed some trailheads to go down and exploring for further research and investigation, I think that last 4 or 5 minutes is probably fertile ground to start plowing for sure. Yeah, some of these I'd heard of, others are totally new. The one called Progress, which is the Blairite think tank, I think would be a good one to look into. Certainly, as it was co-founded with a Rothschild banker. But then also this one, Migration Advisory Committee. I hope we'll be hearing a little more about that, because this is a huge topic at the minute, very much forefront of people's minds, and it's affecting everybody. So, we can kind of see it playing out in real time. I would like to know if the Migration Advisory Committee are active and what they're pushing for, where their funding comes from, and who they are, whose ears they're whispering into, like Wormtongue from Game of Thrones. Okay, we've got next section. What time are we on? Oh, we're just on the 2-hour mark. We've got a bit of time. Next section is A Thoroughly Fabianized World. And this is going to be talking about Fabianism's global network. These sections are so dense with information that I feel like we should take a break before going on to the next one to just digest everything we just read. But at the same time, there's just me sitting here with the book, and I can't riff off a lot of this info because it's a lot of stuff that I don't know about before. I think, though, I think it makes sense. And we know as well that one aspect of, I'll riff a little bit. One aspect of communism and socialism is the establishment of bureaucracy, and it necessitates the creation of this whole machinery which will facilitate and administer the state. When everything is controlled and run by the state, then you're going to have to employ a bunch of people to run it and control it. And they tell you that, this is a totally different thing to, but it's, what am I trying to say? Like it still runs similarly to a corporation, but there's no onus to deliver a high quality product on time. Right? So this is where I think Nigel would say, a privately run and owned corporation operating in a free market would be superior, because if they don't deliver a high quality product on time at a fair price that people are willing to pay and people want, then it's just going to go out of business and go defunct. But the difference is when you have a state apparatus which is funded through a mechanism of collecting money under threat of imprisonment, the money is always going to keep coming in, and you don't really have to worry so much about whether or not the service you provide is efficient or works or good value for money or a high quality product. And so you can bloat up that bureaucracy, and you can use that whole machinery to justify the further collection of more money and more taxes. And it doesn't matter if the people in there are competent, if they're good people, if they're hardworking, or if they're even doing anything at all. And I do know people who have first-hand experience of working with or in the civil service here in Great Britain, and it's not a well-oiled, functioning machine that delivers high-quality services reliably time after time. It's a real confusing, jumbled up mess of what I just describe as a bunch of people sitting at laptops. That's largely what is actually being done with the money. It's paying a vast number of people to just sit at their laptops and push pixels around all day. It's shocking. It really is. I'm sure if people knew the statistics of what their tax money is actually paying for, even if people did know that information, they probably wouldn't do anything about it. We're pretty dumbed down at this point by and neutered and numbed into passivity by the screens. But the point I'm making is that whole description there of the different groups and institutes and think tanks and committees is very indicative of a socialist system with a bloated bureaucracy that exists on the extortion of money through the threat of violence. So I think that's why there were so many different names and groups mentioned, is to make that point. What was the title of that section again? Yeah, Making Britain Socialist. So that, I think that was the point Ratiu was making. So Rosemary Smith is here. Good evening. She says, what a great find. Very much important to try and keep books before they all disappear. Yes, agree. Totally agree 100%. And I'm sticking to it, and I'm going to keep buying books and hoovering them up and putting them in safe places. We got R. Murray 1 as well over on Rumble. Good evening. Give me a little flexing arm emoticon. Always good to see. But it's very nice to have you here, and I'm glad you have returned for another installment. All right, then. That's enough of an interlude. We've had a little break. Let's get back to it. So this next section is a thoroughly Fabianized world, and we're looking at the global network of Fabianism. Like its expansion in the United Kingdom, the international expansion of Fabianism has been deliberate, systematic, and very thorough. Even before becoming a national force, the Fabian Society had begun to extend its international tentacles through emigrating individual Fabians, through the formation of overseas Fabian societies, and through systematic propaganda campaigns. One of the earliest activists to have sown the seeds of Fabianism overseas was Karl Marx's youngest daughter, Eleanor. A believer in theatre as a socialist tool, she had met Bernard Shaw and become involved with fellow Social Democratic Federation member and Fabian Edward Aveling, who was a translator of Marx's Das Kapital into English. In 1885, accompanied by Aveling and Marx's disciple and intimate friend Wilhelm Liebknecht, who was a co-founder of Germany's Social Democratic Party, Eleanor Marx Aveling went on a tour of the United States to promote socialism. As in England, Fabians were particularly active in American universities, beginning with Harvard, the first bridgehead of Fabian infiltration in America, followed by other universities. Fabian Society leaders Sidney and Beatrice Webb themselves toured America in 1888 and 1898, when they trained Fabian groups and established connections with the American Economic Association at Harvard University. The Webbs were followed by other prominent Fabian missionaries, including LSE lecturer Graham Wallace, who taught at Harvard on several occasions from 1910, and Harold Lasky, who lectured at Harvard from 1916 to 1919. Like many other universities around the world, apart from Fabian teachers, Harvard had a library full of Fabian writings and soon became a stronghold of Fabianism. Among Americans indoctrinated, there were James Harvard Robinson, W.E.B. Du Bois, Oswald Garrison Villard, and in particular Walter Lippmann, who studied under Wallace in 1910 and later visited the Webbs and other Fabian leaders in England, and David Rockefeller. Rockefeller, who wrote a senior thesis on Fabian socialism entitled Destitution Through Fabian Eyes, was appointed to Harvard's Board of Overseers in the 1950s and 60s and has been a good friend of Harvard presidents like Nathan M. Pusey. And the reference for that is a book by Rockefeller at page 332. I wonder if that's his memoirs. I don't know. It's probably not it's probably not the David Rockefeller memoirs I've got up there, is it? Because he would have been a younger one. It's so confusing when they keep using the same names in these families. As a journalist, political activist, and advisor to U.S. presidents from Woodrow Wilson to Lyndon Johnson, the Fabian Lippmann became one of the most influential Americans of the early 20th century. Together with Harry W. Laidler, Lippmann was a leader of the New York Intercollegiate Socialist Society, which had been founded under Fabian influence and guidance, and was later renamed League for Industrial Democracy to reflect the Fabian socialism advocated by the Webbs in their book, Industrial Democracy. In 1914, Lippmann became founder and editor of the socialist magazine New Republic, which published contributions by British Fabians. As admitted by Margaret Cole, The League for Industrial Democracy was one of the main contacts through which the London Fabian Society exercised influence in America. In fact, the LID was more than just a contact being described in Fabian Society annual reports as one of our provincial societies. Earlier, former London Fabian Society executive member J.W. Martin, in collaboration with William D.P. Bliss of Boston, had established an American Fabian Society at Boston, which fathered Fabian societies in Philadelphia and San Francisco, and later societies were recorded in Chicago and at Yale. Of particular importance was British Fabian influence on religion. The Fabian Harry Frederick Ward emigrated to America, where he was involved in the founding of the U.S. Federal Council of Churches in 1909. Percival Chubb, a founding member of the London Fabian Society, became president of the American Ethical Union in 1934. Similarly, in 1906, W.D.P. Bliss, who was secretary of the Christian Social Union, joined the Christian Socialist Fellowship, which was affiliated with the Catholic Socialist Society and the Socialist Party. Ward, Chubb, and other Fabian expats, together with local Fabians like Bliss, preached various shades of Christian socialism in America while remaining in contact with the London Society. As other parts of the world, British and local Fabians in America were responsible for the creation of organizations that mirrored those back in England. The American Christian Socialist Society, organized by Bliss, the Christian Socialist League, which revolved around Bliss's paper, The Dawn, the Church Socialist League, the Church League for Industrial Democracy, the Fellowship of Socialist Christians, etc. And the reference for that is Britannica Encyclopedia. Frequent visiting preachers of Fabianism to America included Keir Hardie. There's that name again. In addition, British Fabianism was influential in America through prominent Fabians like Herbert G. Wells and John Maynard Keynes. Through his prolific writings and New Republic contributions, Wells became the idol of America's left-wing intelligentsia in the first 2 decades of the 20th century. Likewise, Keynes attained extensive and lasting influence in America from the early 1930s through his gospel of the general theory of employment, interest, and money, expounding the Fabian and New Economics, and was particularly admired by President Roosevelt and other leading Americans. Fabian economists like Keynes became chief advisors to governments and were instrumental in the institutionalization of the role of the unelected economic advisor as de facto public policy maker. Keynes himself, who, as head of the Fabians' Royal Economic Society, was the official economist of Fabian socialism, served as advisor to the British government during World War I, joined the Economic Advisory Council to the 1929 Labour government, and became the leading light of the Treasury after the Second World War, while also being a co-architect of the 1944 Bretton Woods Conference, which established the World Bank and the IMF. Keynes's enduring legacy in America is evident from President Obama's choice of economic advisors. Already in 2008, Obama, who has been described as a shady Chicago socialist on account of his links with the Chicago branch of the Socialist New Party, appointed a number of Keynesian economists to key positions in his entourage, such as Robert Samuelson Summers, head of the National Economic Council, Timothy Franz Gaithner, Secretary of the Treasury, and Christina Roma, Chair of the Council of Economic Advisors. America's Fabians performed much the same function as their British counterparts, faithfully following the pattern for gradual social, economic, political, and cultural revolution set by their parent society in London. In Lippmann's own words, their object was, quote, to make reactionaries stand-patters conservatives, conservatives liberals, liberals radicals, and radicals socialists. In other words, we tried to move everyone up a peg in the direction of socialism. Yeah, I remember that quote. I remember reading that in Martin's book, Fabian Freeway. This was paralleled by British Fabians who aimed to make conservatives more liberal and liberals more socialist. As in Britain, This was achieved in collaboration with a nationwide network of organizations and institutions mirroring British counterparts, such as the American Economic Association, modeled on the British Economic Association, the Rand School of Social Science, and the Department of Economics at Harvard University, inspired by the London School of Economics and the Workers' Educational Association. Needless to say, the Fabians also established a strong presence in Australia, Canada, and New Zealand. Following in the footsteps of the Webbs, Charles L. Morrison had gone in 1889 to Adelaide to spread Fabianism, and Fabian societies appeared there in 1894 and later in Melbourne. Canada had Fabian societies in Ottawa, Toronto, Montreal, and Hamilton, Ontario. There was a Fabian society at Christchurch, New Zealand. Similarly, by 1890, India had a Fabian society at Bombay and later at Madras. The Madras Society called itself the Fabian Society of India and had as president Annie Besant, who in 1891 had suddenly converted to Theosophy, though obviously remaining a faithful and trusted Fabian. Like the Fabian societies in America, those in the colonies were in periodical communication with the parent body. And that is a quote from Fabian Society Annual Report 1909 to 1910. There were also Fabian societies in Japan, South Africa, Nigeria, and apparently even Burma, as stated by Fabian Society co-founder and honorary secretary E.R. Pease. The society always retained a scattering of members, mostly officials or teachers, in India, Africa, China, and South Africa. In fact, it was far more than a mere scattering, and the officials and teachers often held positions of influence and importance, exactly as predicted by the Society's annual reports. Excuse me a sec. Whoa. Annual report, wasn't it? Here we are. Indians, in particular, who were deemed more suitable for conversion to socialism than the Africans, West Africans, or Chinese, have always been staunch disciples of Fabianism and have played a key role in the Fabian scheme. Muhammad Ali Jinnah, future creator of Pakistan, and Mahatma Gandhi became members of the Fabian Society in 1920. Though not a member, future Prime Minister Jawaharlal Nehru also came under Fabian influence at about the same time, later making India a Fabian socialist republic with a constitution suitably drafted by LSE alumnus B.R. Ambedkar. As correctly pointed out by the daughter of leading Fabian Willie Herbert Utley, Frida, Fabian socialists trained at LSE and other schools in England became the new ruling class in Asia. The role played by LSE-trained politicians, civil servants, and academics, and particularly economists, in running governments around the world has been confirmed by LSE leaders like Lord Dahrendorf, as has the Fabians' close relationship with India. The Indians' special services rendered to Fabianism were acknowledged with the appointment in 2003 of Sundar Katwala, author of Reinventing the Commonwealth, as Fabian Society General Secretary. In Europe, Ireland has been blessed with a personal visitation from the Fabian pontiffs, the Webbs themselves, who conveniently used their honeymoon there in 1892 to spread the gospel of Fabianism. After the Webbs, other Fabian missionaries were dispatched to various parts of Ireland with special Fabian tracts, sporting green covers instead of the usual red. On its part, the continent had been subjected to the missionary activities of apostles of Fabianism like Willie Utley, and groups on Fabian lines were established at Madrid, Copenhagen, Frankfurt, and Budapest. One of the earliest Fabian strongholds in Madrid was one called Escuela Nueva, modelled on the London Fabian Society and headed by leading socialist Prof. Enrique Martí Jara. Fabians were also active in Greece, Turkey, and neighbouring countries where they spread their progressive ideas. Leading Fabians like Sidney Webb, Arthur Henderson, Morgan Phillips, and Ramsay MacDonald were early supporters of a Jewish state in Palestine, followed by Arthur Creech Jones, Herbert Morrison, Philip Noel Baker, and Richard Crossman, and were instrumental in paving the way for the creation of Israel, which they saw as a pioneer of socialism in the region. This again illustrates how legitimate demands for a national home are systematically diverted for the advancement of international socialism, whose ultimate goal is the abolition of the nation state. In addition to Fabian societies proper, the London HQ established an extensive global network of socialist trade unions and other organizations in the political, educational, and cultural fields, with officials being brought over for training, indoctrination, and direction. Delegations from the Commonwealth and all over the world were received in London, where they conferred with members of the Fabian International and Commonwealth Bureau or attended propaganda and indoctrination programs such as Fabian summer schools. Following the failure of Marx and Engels to impose socialism by force of arms, their movement had already taken an opportunist Fabian turn, that is, away from violent revolution and towards gradual parliamentary methods. The great revolutionary Engels himself came to preach, quote, slow propaganda work and parliamentary activity. Fabianism, therefore, was a development within the socialist movement. The Fabian Society's special merit was to cleverly place itself at the forefront of the new socialist trend and hijack it for its own purpose. While earlier socialism had been dominated by Marx and Engels and the German Social Democratic Party, which was the world's largest and most influential socialist organization, Britain's Fabians soon became the leading ideological force in the socialist movement, being in a position to influence other socialists, including their former German tutors, and laying the foundations of the infamous Frankfurt School. Already, by the early 1890s, thousands of copies of Fabian essays in socialism were being sold in England and America, followed by translations into European languages such as Dutch, Norwegian, and German. A more subtle, though no less effective form of influence was exercised through literally hundreds of novels and other writings churned out by the Fabian propaganda machine, as well as through Shaw's propagandistic plays, which by 1914 had gained a worldwide audience, being performed in nearly a dozen European countries and the US. In sum, we can see why by 1915 Fabian leader Bernard Shaw was able to assert that the world had been thoroughly Fabianized in the previous 25 years. Similarly, in 1857, Rita Hindon of the Colonial Bureau reported, with full justification, that there seemed to be Fabians everywhere in the world. Dun, dun, dun. Well, this is... okay, we got... let me see. We are going to get to the open conspiracy. Fantastic. I might even just pause there as well. So, spreading throughout the world. I've mentioned before on the channel that the LSE has the intake of students to the LSE, the London School of Economics, is like 80% foreign. Even though it's in London, mind you, like London itself as a city is now, I think, somewhere in the region of 60% foreign now. So it's not a surprise, really. But the LSE does seem to exist to train people up and send them back to their own countries. So the idea that this worldview, this socialism, as created by not created by the Fabians, but as pushed by the Fabians, it's believable that they got it further afield than just the UK. I think the London School of Economics is a real good case to underscore that point. And I think I've looked at it before on Wikipedia, and we've definitely been over it on the channel. I'm just going to pull it up quickly. And looks like it doesn't Yeah, so the LSE alumni and faculty include 55 past or present heads of state or government and 20 Nobel laureates. So that's a lot. The proposal to establish the school was conceived during a breakfast meeting between the Webbs and George Bernard Shaw and someone called Lewis Flood. So they came up with the idea, they got the money together, and they did it. And there's actually a whole, there's quite a lot here on the Wikipedia article that looks like I haven't been through, and I haven't highlighted it. So that would be one to probably look at and do another preamble ramble at some point. Got some info about the finances and endowment. There's a mascot, academic profile, programs and degrees, research centers. I'm sure there was something on here, though, about the number of students that it admits. Yeah, the area historically known. LSE has more than 11,000 students, just under 70% of whom come from outside the UK. Interesting that just under 70% come from outside the UK. So this is really not a UK thing. It's not a London thing. It's a place to influence other countries all over the world. So that's probably one of the hubs of this global network that we were just reading about. A lot of references to Rose Martin's book, Fabian Freeway, in this last section that we just read, which has to remind people it is on the channel in its entirety. It's on Odyssey, Rumble, and YouTube under the playlists tab. That'd be a good one to go to after this one, perhaps, or alongside it if you've got that much time and you want to just soak it all up. But he is leaning heavily on her work, so you're going to get a lot of the similar sort of points, just in more detail. And there were parts of that book as well which read a little bit like this, which was a lot of names, a lot of places, a lot of organizations, and not a whole lot of narrative, a lot of detail. And so this is information dense, but not necessarily the most thrilling or gripping stuff to be to be reading on a Friday night. People might be falling asleep out there, but that's all good. What stood out to me from that last section then? Yeah, this idea that they hijacked socialism. For the Fabian Society's special merit was to cleverly place itself at the forefront of the new socialist trend and hijack it for its own purposes. As I've said before, socialism is really insidious because it appeals to people's better nature, and it makes people who want to see fairness and justice in the world, it really appeals to them. And so I think that's why it's insidious and why it's so easy to spread it, especially to countries that have more corruption or inequality or worse infrastructure. You could imagine how easy it is to go over there and be like, you need this thing called socialism, which would really take care and make sure the people who are doing the work get a better deal, don't you? Don't you think that would be a good idea? So it probably wasn't that hard, that much of a hard sell when they were going abroad and doing these trips to go and speak and visit and build these networks. Probably wasn't a really hard sell. And if you focused on the middle class or the people or any place that had some sort of middle class, I think that's where they would go. They would talk to the middle class and be like, oh, the people above you, they're really taking the piss and they've got too much, haven't they? And those people below you, they really need our help, don't they? We should do something about that. And little did they know. I wonder as well how much was open and how much was in secret. When I say that, I'm talking about what is the secret part of this? Because he says it's the Milner-Fabian conspiracy, and we're coming up to a section that's called the open conspiracy, which is that reference to H.G. Wells, was, and you know, we've read Fabian Freeway, and we've read or we are aware of Tragedy and Hope and Carol Quigley's work. You know, is any of this actually secret? What are they, or are they just doing that? Are they actually doing the open conspiracy and just being very upfront? But at the very least, they have to be promising a situation that's never going to arise, because their policies never result in this kind of perfect, fair society where everyone gets exactly what they need and the inequality is abolished. That never happens. Like, all we've seen over the last 100 years is more like a widening of that gap. And I would say, actually, though, probably there has been a rising tide which has lifted all the boats. More people have access to more material comfort than previously on average, but there is still rampant inequality. There is still little social mobility, and it's almost like I said in the last video, where I was saying that the way you get everyone ensnared by the internet is to first make it very open and very free of censorship and free of control. Then everyone's like, oh, this is great, this is amazing, it's going to change the world, let's all start using it. And then once everyone's on it, you start to ratchet in the control and the censorship, and you start to lock it down once everybody's in. You tempt them in. But by tempting them in, you've got to give them something, right? You got to give them that little piece of candy or that little sniff of whatever it is that they want to get. You give them a little bit to get them to come closer to you, to step into your trap. I feel like it's a similar thing with the goals, the progress. People can point to the progress that's been made, but I think that progress has been very much controlled, and we've been allowed to make certain progress in certain ways, but overall, in the long term, it actually serves this agenda of a planned society, top-down technocratic, ruled by scientific elites. I think that's where it's going. And so they've had to allow a certain amount of material improvement to people's lives, a certain amount of freedom with regards to maybe travel, or a certain access to amount of like holidays or material comforts. They've had to allow some of that in order to advance the plans of the technocracy. I don't know. That's just kind of my thinking. But we've got a couple of comments, and then we'll read another section, and then we'll call it a night. I'm getting pretty tired, actually. Frank Lennon says, well, going to have to pick up so much on playback. An important phone call just landed a while back. Oh, well, the video will be here, and even if it's not, I am recording other, backup copies, and so even if it gets wiped off YouTube, I can always make the audio or the backup video copies available. Rosemary Smith says, Anneke Lucas' quest for love. She was trained by David Rockefeller. Only when she was older did she recognize the perpetrators, one Dr. Hans Harmsen, who got a scholarship from Rockefeller. Rosemary Smith also says, Wikipedia has watered down info for this man, but after the war he was supported by a UK doctor of hygiene. But what kind of hygiene? Oh, I didn't know either of those names, but Anneke Lucas and Dr. Hans Harmsen, I didn't know either of those. So thanks for that. Appreciate it very much. Okay. I'll do another section and call it a night. So this next section is Fabianism and World Revolution. So we've gone from their takeover of Britain. They've turned Britain into a socialist country. They've built out these networks across all the continents. Now they're looking to institute a world revolution. Let's find out. The Fabians' path of gradual socialism did not prevent them from maintaining links with more revolutionary and violent movements. Of particular importance in this respect was the Socialist International, first founded by Karl Marx in London in 1864 as the International Working Men's Association. It was reconstituted in Paris in 1889 as the Second International, and again in 1951 as a Socialist International. As such, it was the coordinating body for international socialism, and the Fabians became involved from the start, attending Second International Congresses in Paris, Brussels, Zurich, London, and again in Brussels, and taking a leading role. Keir Hardie attended the Second International's founding Congress, and Bernard Shaw was at the 1893 and 1896 Congresses in Zurich and London. Particularly significant is the participation in the International by elements like Kerensky's Socialist Revolutionary Party, as well as Alexander Helfand and Lenin, who later were involved in the Russian Revolution of 1917. Indeed, Fabianism's influence on and connections with Russian socialism and Soviet communism are worthy of closer investigation. The Fabian concept of industrial democracy as a model for socialist society was adopted by Lenin, who in 1897 translated into Russian the Webb's work of that title. According to Shaw, Lenin studied the works of Sidney Webb and became a gradualist, after which he transformed Russian socialism into Fabianism. Members of the London-based Society of Friends of Russian Freedom, an organization connected with Russian revolutionaries, were also members of the Fabian Rainbow Circle. Webb's and Shaw's Fabian friend Joseph Fells, who was married to Fanny Rothschild's daughter, Mary Fells, provided a loan of £1,700 in addition to pocket money in the sum of one gold sovereign per delegate to Lenin, Trotsky, and their Russian Social Democratic Labour Party during the 1907 London Conference. We also know that Julius West of the Fabian Executive was present at the Second Russian Congress of Soviets, at which Lenin declared his new communist government. That the Russian communist regime had links to officials of the English and Russian Bank and other Western banks. That Shaw described Lenin as the greatest statesman of Europe. That Shaw and his friends Lord and Lady Astor visited Stalin in 1931, followed by the Webbs in 1932. That both Shaw and Sidney Webb approved of the Soviet regime and retained strong sympathies for it to the last, that the Webbs regarded Stalinism as applied Fabianism, that Shaw in 1931 declared that Bolshevism became Fabianism called communism, that he believed that Russian communism was neither anarchism nor syndicalism, but Fabian socialism, and that the USSR was really a union of Fabian republics. Finally, we know that in 1948, 2 years before his death, Shaw said that Stalin is a good Fabian. In Germany, leading socialist Eduard Bernstein I never know if it's a Stein or a Steen, came under the influence of the Fabian Society early on, while in exile in London from 1888 to 1901. On his return to Germany, Bernstein urged his party to follow the English Fabian method of introducing socialist reforms through parliamentary pressure, or what Shaw defined as wire-pulling the government in order to get socialist measures passed. And by the outbreak of World War I, his teachings had thoroughly permeated the party, laying the foundations of Europe's revisionist brand of Marxism along Fabian lines. As proof of agreement between Bernstein-Steen's, I'm just going to say both from now on, and the Fabian's brand of socialism, the English version of his book, The Precondition of Socialism, was published in 1909 by the Fabian Independent Labour Party under the title Evolutionary Socialism. The activities of the Fabianized Social Democrats resulted in their domination of German politics. The November Revolution of 1918 led to the abolition of the German monarchy and establishment of a social democratic government in the following year. In Austria, too, the Fabians had established a Fabian circle in Vienna in the early days, and Austria soon became a Fabian stronghold. In the wake of the 1918 revolution, the Austrian monarchy was abolished, and prominent Fabian Michael Heinrich became president of the Austrian Republic. Meanwhile, Wall Street interests, allied with the Fabian Society and the Milner Group, which included the J.P. Morgan-controlled Guarantee Trust Company, were involved in China's 1912 revolution, led by National Socialist Sun Yat-sen, and Mexico's 1910-20 revolution, led by Pancho Villa and Venustiano Carranza. That's this reference for that is Anthony Sutton's work. I don't know which one, but one of them. Interestingly, the same Fabians who called for the abolition of private property and capitalism also called for the imposition of British trade interests on other countries by force. The Fabian Society's position was spelt out by Bernard Shaw in Fabianism and the Empire, a manifesto by the Fabian Society, where he stated that Chinese institutions were incompatible with British trade interests and therefore they had to go, adding that if the Chinese could not establish order in a British sense, the powers must establish it for them. Sending the gunboats to force other nations to do business with Britain was piratical behaviour of the worst kind. It certainly did not enhance Britain's prestige among other nations. On the contrary, it was this kind of behaviour that inevitably led to conflict with other countries, such as Germany, who, not unreasonably, failed to see why the British should be allowed to grab one colony after the other, while preventing others from doing the same. Shaw himself conceded that British ministers who waged war on other nations for economic reasons were being used by financial interests as a ferret is used by a poacher. But, at the same time, Shaw asserted the right of foreign powers to establish governments in countries opposed to those powers' interests, welcoming the European military expedition against China to enforce international commercial and political interests. Needless to say, once such practices had become established policy, there was no end to it. After China came Russia, Germany, and eventually the British Empire itself. Clearly, while the Fabian Manifesto condemned the actions of some financial interests, it condoned others, namely those that were close or convenient to the society and its international socialism. It becomes obvious by now that we are dealing with nothing less than a worldwide conspiracy to subvert the existing order and take over political and economic power in the interests of a private clique representing international financial interests. In line with this agenda, Fabians have established and maintained close links to socialist, revolutionary, and terrorist organizations and regimes across the world. This has been done through individual Fabians, such as John Parker, who held the posts of Fabian Society General Secretary, Chairman, and President, and was a regular visitor to the Soviet Union from the 30s into the 60s, as well as organizations set up for this purpose, such as the Africa Bureau, which linked Fabians with revolutionary movements in Africa, notably that of South Africa's Nelson Mandela and Tanzania's Julius Nyerere. That's Nyerere for anyone who's just listening on the audio. How would you pronounce that? Nyerere? Nyerere. Fabians have also been linked with the IRA and Libya's Muammar Gaddafi. The latter provided arms, training and funds to the IRA and to Mandela's ANC cells, as well as funding the Fabians' LSE. So Gaddafi funded the Fabians' London School of Economics? What? I gotta look up the reference for that. So he says that's Harnden, 2011. Harnden. Right, so we've got to look for footnotes, references, bibliography. It's over here somewhere. Harnden. Right, here we go. Please tell me these are in alphabetical order. Toby Harnden. Libyan arms helped the IRA to wage war. Oh, okay. So that Harnden footnote is talking about the link between Libya and IRA. Unless it also mentions in that article that they put some money to the London School of Economics as well, which would be pretty wild if that's true. But now we're getting the international picture, and I like, there's some really choice quotes in this section that we just read, particularly about a worldwide conspiracy to subvert the existing order, take over political and economic power in the interests of a private clique representing international financial interests. That's the thing. That's what's behind it all. A certain, I think, probably very small group of financial interests. And so that's what I was trying to say, and what I think Nigel Watson might have misunderstood is when I was saying that there are what you might call capitalists behind this whole thing. Not saying that capitalism itself is the problem and causing this. I'm saying there's some people who have built up a massive amount of capital, i.e. financial influence through industry, through banking, whatever the mechanism may be, and they are, according to this and other books like the Sutton books, the Wall Street trilogy, they are funding Hitler, they are funding the Bolshevik Revolution, and they are funding, what's the third one in that series? FDR, Franklin D. Roosevelt, right? So it's not as simple as to say, and I think Nigel's looking at the theory. Okay, a free market capitalism, the theory of that states that XYZ will happen in this way. That's fine. Not disputing that. I'm looking at, okay, but in our reality, what has happened to get us to where we are now? And it looks like the part of history that's left out and is not mainstream and is not taught is this collusion and collaboration between the financial, what you might call capitalist industrialists, the Rockefellers, the Carnegies, JP Morgans, and they're plugging into and supporting of groups such as the Fabian socialists, because you would expect them to be at odds with each other. And, they kind of preach, or at least the socialists preach, that they are against capitalism, and yet at the same time, they're relying upon it and working with certain capitalists and financiers, right? So it's kind of tricky to parse out the differences in what we're talking about, but I think there's we're just coming at it from two slightly different angles. I'm still hoping that we can get on a video call soon, though, and discuss it and get it cleared up, because I've certainly got a lot to learn from Nigel. He's been an economics teacher for a long time, and so having, even though I'm not so good with theoretical models of things, being able to have those to hand, to describe, to talk about, to refer to when you are looking at reality and how it works, but saying, but it could work like this, or it should work like this, is a useful thing to be able to do. So I'm not at all knocking that way of analyzing and talking about things. All right, we'll finish with the open conspiracy. This is about 4 pages, so we might run a little over 3 hours, but let's see. The open conspiracy. Imaginative literature has been a key medium of Fabian propaganda and indoctrination from the start. Revealing some aspects of a conspiracy while concealing others is a typical Milner-Fabian pattern that can be found, however unwittingly, even in historians like Carroll Quigley. To deflect attention and criticism, the Milner-Fabian camp came up with the ingenious yet highly characteristic tactic, which is easy to unmask once the Milner-Fabian mode of operation has been grasped, of publishing a book entitled The Open Conspiracy. Written by Shaw's former colleague on the Fabian Propaganda Committee, Herbert G. Wells, in 1928, and revised several times, the book attempted to take the wind out of the critic's sails by falsely claiming that the conspiracy was open and that the whole world was participating in it. According to Wells, the conspiracy arises naturally and necessarily from the increase of knowledge and the broadening outlook of many minds throughout the world. According to him, the conspiracy was not a movement initiated by any individual or radiating from any particular center, nor was it a single organization, but a, quote, conception of life out of which organizations and new orientations will arise. What is significant is that Wells did describe the movement as a conspiracy, even though he cleverly qualified it as open. While it may be argued that a conspiracy that is open and in which the whole world participates is not really a conspiracy, which seems to be the gist of the book's misleading message. The question is whether this applies to this particular conspiracy. On closer examination, this does not appear to be the case. The fact is that the organizations directing the movement were anything but open. The Fabian Society itself was a private membership organization or club which could not be described as open to the public by any stretch of the imagination. This was even more so in the case of the Milner Group, which, for all intents and purposes, was a secret organization. It is clear from many statements made by members of the Fabian Society and its associated organizations that these groups aimed to establish a new ruling order led by an academic and administrative elite, or group of experts, which was in turn directed by themselves. And the notes for that are the Pew book, the Martin book, and Quigley. That both Fabian Society and Milner Group leaders intended to rule from behind the scenes is evident. For example, from Fabian Society General Secretary Pease sitting discreetly on the Labour Party executive, while Webb was chairman of the party's Advisory Committee on International Questions and later Colonial Secretary, and thus instrumental in devising Labour policy for the whole of the British Empire. More recent examples would be Peter Mandelson, architect of New Labour, as well as friend of the Rothschilds and advisor to Lazard, European chairman of the Trilateral Commission and Goldman Sachs chairman Peter Sutherland, who also served as chairman of the academic elite, going by the name of London School of Economics and many others. Clearly, this in itself made the conspiracy far less open than it was claimed. Nor was there any evidence to support the claim that the whole world participated in forming these groups' motivating ideology. On the contrary, the evidence, for example, shows that public opinion was formed by organizations like the Labour Party, whose agenda was dictated by the Fabian Society on the instructions of a few leading Fabians who were close friends of a small clique of international financiers whose true motives and interests were unknown to the general public, for example, to the whole world, which was supposedly involved in the conspiracy. Both the Fabian Society and the Milner Group were expert propagandists and manipulators of public opinion. A prime example was Bernard Shaw himself. Even before joining Wells on the Fabian Propaganda Committee in the early 1900s, he had routinely published fake letters and imaginary interviews for purposes of propaganda and self-promotion. Engels, who believed that the Fabians were motivated by personal interests and were not true socialists, conceded that their propagandist writings were of the best kind which the English have produced. Neither Shaw's personal propaganda efforts nor those of the various Fabian outfits, the Propaganda Committee, the Society for Socialist Inquiry and Propaganda, etc., would have been in the least necessary had it been the case that these organizations were inspired by public opinion and not the other way around. From the very start, the Fabian Society had announced that the Fabians were associated for the purpose of spreading opinions held by them, not opinions held by the world. On their part, the masses correctly identified the Fabians as unprincipled spiders, spinning webs to entrap honest working men. As already noted, Shaw himself described the world as Fabianized, which clearly indicated an influence radiating from the Fabian Society to the wider world, not from the world to the society. It follows that the conspiracy was, after all, a conspiracy. And like all other conspiracies, it did have a geographical centre from which it originally radiated, namely London. More importantly, it had an intellectual centre consisting of the Fabian Society and the Milner Group. The conspiracy may or may not have been initiated by a single individual or, for that matter, by a single organisation. But, firstly, initiation by a single individual or organisation is not a requirement for a conspiracy to qualify as such. And secondly, it was a single network of closely interlocking organizations, the chief among them being the Fabian Society and the Milner Group, which operated in parallel and in harmony with each other. Milner-Fabian elements created the Tavistock Institute as an instrument of psychological mass manipulation. In the 1940s, Fabian Hugh Dalton and Milnerite Lord Selborne controlled the British Ministry of Economic Warfare, which was in charge of Special Operations Executive, whose founder was Dalton himself. Dalton was also instrumental in the creation of the Political Warfare Executive, aka Political Intelligence Department, which later mutated into the Psychological Warfare Division. The same elements and their Anglo-American associates were responsible for the creation of the League of Nations, the United Nations, the European Union, and related organizations working for the overarching goal of world domination. As admitted by the Fabian executive itself, the Fabians were the brain workers of the Labour Party. The Labour Party in turn led the masses who had been conditioned through systematic propaganda and indoctrination to falsely believe that Labour represented their interests. In 1954, on the Fabian Society's 70th anniversary, its secretary Margaret Cole described the society as the thinking machine of British socialism. In fact, given its overwhelming influence on culture, politics, and education in Britain, America, India, and elsewhere, the society may equally have been described as the thinking machine of Britain and the world. At any rate, like other similar movements, the conspiracy had a mastermind or brain consisting of leading ideologists who did the thinking and decision-making on behalf of the rank and file. And where there is a brain, there is a centre. Indeed, Fabian Labour leaders like MacDonald advocated a state, i.e. a centre, that, quote, thinks and feels for the whole. Above all, this network of organizations, led by the Fabian Society and the Milner Group, the intellectual centre or brain of the conspiracy, had a self-serving aim, which Wells himself describes in his book as to amalgamate existing controls and forms of human association into a common world directorate. It must be beyond dispute that this world directorate, as in the case of the League of Nations, the United Nations, and similar organizations, was to be created and controlled by these very groups. Indirect world rule by an academic elite consisting of themselves was the ultimate aim of the Fabians as it was of Milnerites and Marxists. To the extent that the Milner-Fabian conspiracy served the interests of a few to the detriment of the many, it was, and continues to be, a conspiracy against humanity. That's a mic drop moment right there. And that's not even the end of the chapter. The next section is Fabianism and world government. That might bring us to the end of the chapter, though. We got Fabianism and genocide, Fabianism and dictatorship, Fabianism and Islamization. Flipping heck. That's a big section. We're going to have to save that for next time, though. Yeah, there's still about 20 pages to go in this chapter, so we're going to leave it there for now. I might read that last bit again, though. To the extent that the Milner-Fabian conspiracy served the interests of a few to the detriment of the many, it was, and continues to be, a conspiracy against humanity. Boom. There you go. Ioan Ratiu dropping truth bombs back in 2012. And we are not even, I don't know, maybe we're about a quarter of the way through now. Look at that. Look how much we got left. I think this is what you could safely describe as a humdinger of a book. So we've got, let's have a look. What's going on? Ned Ludd finally made it live. Better late than never. Appreciate all you do for the dyslexic community who would take months to misread these works. Thank you, Ned. It's very good to have you here. I'm glad you finally caught us on a live. And to all you dyslexics out there, hang in there. You know, what does the saying go? We need to start a movement, and the slogan can be "Dyslexics of the world, untie." LJ is saying, wow, about the bit with Gaddafi. Yeah, If Gaddafi funded LSE, that's what it read. That's how I read it. It is pretty wild. But Gaddafi's connections with the IRA, very interesting. Rosemary Smith says they support negative behavior. I'm not sure. I can't remember which bit that might have been. But I think that was quite a revealing and important chapter. Certainly a lot of dense information, a lot of names, but the names that we know. We know Tony Blair and Gordon Brown, and drawing that link to the recent New Labour Party and that whole election cycle is really powerful. It's really bringing it home. Reading the Quigley book from 1966 or Fabian Freeway from 1966 is fantastic, but there is still that disconnect between, it was back in the 60s, it's quite a while ago. But when we're reading this one and it's bringing it right into the present day, right up to the times that we are living through, and including these sections as well on Islamization, I think it's... I'm not surprised it's an overpriced book and hard to find these days. Let's have a quick look, and maybe we could check this, and we'll see. We're broadcasting on this now, and we're talking about it, and we don't have a massive reach on this channel, but let's just look up this book and what kind of prices and availability is out there. So you've got, that's firstly 2 hits. That's not a lot. Sometimes you have pages and pages of hits on this first search. But we'll open those both in 2 different tabs. All right, so you got a copy in the United States, which is up for £50.91, which that's not bad. And then there's a copy in India, and that's £287.48. So plus shipping. Oh, that includes shipping. Oh, the shipping's only £6.22. The book is £280. Then used, you've got a used copy for £67 with a shipping of £13. So that's £80 if you want to drop on that. And then the most expensive used copy is £572.82. You kidding me? What is going on there? There it is. Oh, that's actually, I don't know which, that's Netherlands, it looks like. So there's a copy in the Netherlands, if you fancy dropping £500. You got this copy in UK, $85. So, yeah, and there's one here on eBay in the United States for £200. So I would say to people, just check regularly. And if you ever find one that is within your price range, pounce on it and grab that and, stick a ring on it, as Beyonce likes to say. If you like it, stick a ring on it. But yeah, it's pretty wild that book is rare, so rare, hard to find, and now super expensive. I think the price for that book started going up when Jay Dyer began talking about it, which is about a year ago now. And I'll mention as well that Jay Dyer's work on this book is very much worth checking out. I might share the video to that. He has some stuff on his site as well behind a paywall. I think he's lectured through the whole book anyway. And he is so well read that he can flesh out even more details and connections for the contents of the book. But definitely check that out. And what else we got? Adam saying, nice evening of reading. Thank you, sir. Celine Lyon says, don't you just love the way they push it in your face while the normies have no clue? Yeah. That's the weird bit, is that it's quite... When you start drawing links between all these organizations and world government, I mean, the first step is when I heard there's a plan for world government, I was like, yeah, sure. Of course there is. I mean, I've traveled to different countries and they're all different and they've all got their own thing going on. There's no way there's going to be a plan for world government. And it's like, oh no, they wrote books about it. They wrote whole books explaining how they wanted to do it. I'm like, they did? Who did? oh, you know, these Cecil Rhodes and Lord Milner and his friends and the Fabian socialists and their friends. I'm like, who are they? You know, and it just goes on from there. And then you learn about the history of League of Nations and that, you know, that whole movement and who was involved in it and how it failed. And you only really need the history of, I'd say, so what, the last 120, maybe 130 years. I don't know much further back than that, although I'm sure there's a lot of you know, fascinating and very important and interesting stuff there. But for me, it's interesting to go back to kind of Cecil Rhodes, and he's got his will, and he wants to create the secret society with the money that he's left, and Rothschild's in charge of it, and then tracing that from there up to the present day, kind of retracing the steps that like Richard Grove's gone on in his Peace Revolution podcast. And that, to me, is the really fascinating thing to do, because that's just walking us through how we got to where we are today, which has been the big question on my mind since, you know, we all got locked down and told to wear nappies on our face and do all that stuff, song and dance through the people's pantomime, as Nigel likes to say. So, yeah, it's good fun. It's very, once you can see it, you know, this is what I was saying in response to your comment, Celine Lyon. Once you can see it, you can't unsee it, and then all the data you get just plugs into it, right? It's a real amazing feeling that I think the normies, they don't really know what they're missing out on, because once you get to a certain level of knowledge and awareness, then pretty much everything you come across fits into it. When you have a coherent narrative and a coherent sort of map of reality, or an accurate map, the new things that come in don't shock you and take you by surprise. Like, you know, I don't know, let's think of a recent event, the assassination on the Trump. These kind of events happen and everyone else is like, whoa, I can't believe we're just living this historical unprecedented thing that's just happened. And it's just like, you can plug it into your knowledge of false flag events, you can plug it into your knowledge of crisis actors, and plug it into your knowledge of how political figures can be built up and have this mythos around them, and it's used to lead and manipulate people. And when you're aware of these Machiavellian tactics and schemes and agendas, it just makes you so much more competent at interpreting and parsing out the new information and the new things that happen as they come in. And you're not swept along for the ride and the emotional roller coaster that everyone else is drawn into. That you know, is kind of just designed to be confusing and overwhelming and ultimately debilitating and disorienting, isn't it? So, yeah. Ned Ludd, as a dyslexic, agnostic insomniac, I lay awake at night wondering if there really is a dog. As I was reading that, I was thinking, flipping heck, agnostic. All right, cool. Oh man, and then I realized where that was going. But that's a really good one. I like that one too. Frank Lennon says, "Crikey, these Fabians are truly everywhere, like a bad rash." Well said. Yes, that's it. They're admitting it as well. I mean, I've got most of the books that Ioan Ratiu is referring to in this Fabian section, which I'm really happy about. I have quite a sizable, like, if you look down here on the right, this whole section pretty much is Fabian socialism, with a few extra things thrown in there. But it's nice to know that I can spend some time to look up the references of the things he's saying. But it is about looking at them in their own words and reading what they say in their own words. And if they tell you that they've got a plan to do this thing and that thing has happened, then I don't know. I don't understand why more people don't wake up and wise up to that fact, Celine Lyon. So you're saying the normies don't get it, and I'm like, yeah, I don't know, but I don't know why they don't get it, because the plans are out there. It is an open conspiracy in many ways. Adam says, oh, hang on, no. Celine Lyon says, okay, let's go back. I missed one here. Melissa says, it is pronounced Nairari. Oh, thank you for the some of the names that I come across in these book readings have me giggling quite a lot of the time. Nairari, thank you. Appreciate that. Hopefully he pops up again somewhere else in the book and I get to use my newly acquired accurate pronunciation of his name. But if not, I'll say it a few times now. Nairari. An excellent phonetic spelling of that as well, Melissa. I got it, Nairari. So, thank you. Celine Lyon says, even with the 11th of the 9th month and the pandemic, I'm just going to say that, and still the normies don't get it exactly. Yeah, I know. If the Big C event didn't snap people into awareness and make them start paying attention, then I really don't think anything will. I mean, it did for a lot of people, myself included, but the ones it didn't, I don't know what would at this point, because since that moment we've been heading further and further into this kind of unreality where the merging of fact and fiction is being deliberately the lines between the two are being deliberately blurred by the internet, by Sean Penn going over to Ukraine and giving Zelensky a BAFTA or whatever it was, or an Oscar or something. I mean, that scene on its own is telling you that this whole thing is like a stage show. It's actors, it's a script, it's a plan, it's a storyline, and it's been written and it's now being performed for you, right? And so people don't know whether they're coming or going at this point because they've been bombarded with even more nonsense and confusing information. So I don't know what would snap people out of it at this point. I really don't. Adam says, once the veil has been lifted, always question everything since the 11th of the 9th month. Yes. I wasn't paying much attention to that when it happened. How old was I? I was 15 years old. So I just cared about guitars and girls basically at that point in my life. And then Melissa says, oh, Nerari is maybe closer. Oh, thank you. Nerari. Nerari sounds better. Okay. Right. We are going to wrap it up there and call it an evening. So thank you very much for hanging out. I appreciate it very much. And hope I haven't missed any messages. Just Turbs over on Rumble. Good evening, Turbs. Thanks for joining. And hope you enjoy the catch-up and the rewind. ESP, thank you for your kind words on Odyssey. All that is left to say is, if you appreciate what I do, you can head over to allmylinks.com/Hayes Reviews. Sign up, like, comment, share, subscribe. All that is lovely jubbly, and it helps me feel good about what I do. But I enjoy it, and it's not necessary, right? So getting the information, uplifting our awareness and our consciousness by taking in pure, clear, what's the word? There's a really good word for what I wanted to say right there, and it just slipped right out. Where you've got like something that's pure, like nice, unadulterated. That's the word. Unadulterated information. It is beneficial to take that in, and to, where possible, spread it with other people and help other people who are looking for it to find it. It's kind of like, oh, you've got questions too. Well, here's a thing over here which can help you answer those questions. And so making these recordings and being here, answering questions, having a back and forth and putting it out there is, it is satisfying and fulfilling on its own. And any sort of support or anything else that comes in is just an extra bonus. So consider signing up, joining the email list, though. That would be really handy. Send me an email, autonomoususername@gmail.com, or just email me if you want to reach out, get in touch, start a conversation, talk about books, life, the universe, anything, everything. I don't have opinions and thoughts and information about everything, but I'll give it a go. I'm quite happy to have conversations with people. What else is there to say? I think that's it. I think that is it. So I'll be back next Tuesday. We are going to crack on. I'll give you another little reminder. The next section is Fabianism and world government. We'll do another live stream then. So enjoy your weekend. It's Friday. 48 hours of freedom ahead, hopefully, if you are lucky enough to enjoy a bit of free time and you get to do things you like. I think that is what you should do. So take it easy. Thank you for being here once again. Take care of yourselves and each other. I'll see you on Tuesday. And until then, God bless.